Chapter 2038. Just now, Zhang Yan could clearly see that Daoren and Xian Chei's strength had yet to pass the stage of truth comprehension. Therefore, he didn't need anyone else to intervene. He could deal with the two of them with his own strength. Although he couldn't kill his fellow god refinement cultivators, he could use the Bushu Heaven's Wei to suppress them. If this matter went smoothly, and he had a chance to take back the land of fortune behind the clear sink chaotic domain, it wouldn't be a problem even if he released the two of them. After all, it was useful to have more people to deal with the void separation tribulation. If they weren't willing to submit, he could just expel them into the void separation tribulation and let that existence finish them off. Xian Chei and Daoren had been on high alert because they had suddenly entered the void separation tribulation. At this moment, when they suddenly felt Zhang Yan's magic power pressing down on them, the two of them hurriedly used their magic power and pushed the changes in the void separation tribulation, instantly lifting them up. The two of them originally thought that as long as the other four didn't intervene, it wouldn't be difficult for them to stop Zhang Yan even if he was stronger than them. As long as there was a chance, they could escape to the present world and no longer be entangled here. The two of them had calculated correctly, but they had still underestimated Zhang Yan's strength. Under this sudden collision, the outermost layer of transcendence energy actually collapsed upon contact, layer by layer collapsing. That vast and mighty force rushed into their inner circle in an instant. Doran's expression changed. He transmitted a message to Xian Chei using his divine will. Fellow Taoist Xian Chei, why is this person's magic power so different from what you said? Why is his magic power so strong? Could it be that fellow Taoist's teacher is hiding something? Taoist Xian Chei snorted. Usually, soul refinement cultivators would be able to sense each other's aura through the collision of their magic power, and they would also be able to see some of the other party's moves. However, once a cultivator passed the truth enlightenment stage, they would be able to restrain themselves, so he had no way of knowing Zhang Yan's background. Even though Zhang Yan wouldn't be able to understand him, it would be fine if his magic power was higher than Zhang Yan's, but if his magic power was weaker than Zhang Yan's, then he would be at a great disadvantage. Fortunately, although the cultivation methods passed down by the sects of the four great chaotic domains were different, he had tried to see the cultivation methods of the Qinsang branch after arriving in the chaotic domains. After a little deduction, he knew what it would be like after reaching a high level of cultivation. He believed that he had a way to deal with it. But now, Zhang Yan's method was completely different from the Qinsang school's cultivation method, and he couldn't find any flaws in it at all. This caused him to lose his greatest advantage. In this battle of pure magic power, the two of them were quickly defeated. They only had one last circle of magic power left to protect themselves. If they couldn't find a way, then perhaps they would be suppressed by Zhang Yan in a short while. Daoren saw that the situation was not good, so he didn't dare to hesitate any longer. He hurriedly called for the help of his magic artifact. Light flashed on his body, and a brilliant golden copper cauldron flew out. There were thousands of golden patterns on it, like surging waves. When the magic power collided with it, these patterns rippled and melted away layer by layer. Not only that, most of the wei that came pouring over actually flowed back to where it came from. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He could immediately see that this magic artifact was very mysterious. It could defend and attack at the same time. Not only could it dissipate the attack, it could also borrow the enemy's power to counterattack. However, he was prepared for this. Since the two of them had good fortune fragments with them that could be used to refine magic tools, then they definitely had treasures with them. Especially since they controlled a land of good fortune, there might be treasures of good fortune hidden within. Now that he saw this item, it was indeed as he expected. The other party was not a treasure spirit like Chao Ying or Yi Han. Even if he used the Bushutian Wei to suppress it, it would at most shake the treasure. It wouldn't affect the owner too much, so he couldn't rely on the Wei to defeat the enemy. Just now, with just one collision, he immediately saw the strengths and weaknesses of this magic artifact. Although it could push back the enemy's power, when it was activated, it could only counter one force. However, he was using the Bushutian Wei and his own magic power at the same time. So even though the two of them had successfully blocked this wave of attack, they were still restrained by him and couldn't escape. Understanding this, he already had a plan. He once again used the Bushutian Whaley to suppress it. At the same time, with a thought, a golden light flashed, and the Tai golden bead appeared. The moment the Bushutian Whaley fell, it was blocked by the Pan Gui. This treasure was also amazing. It shook with golden patterns and firmly protected the two of them. Moreover, it once again pushed back the attacking force. Zhang Yan ignored this surging golden wave. Just as it was about to reach his body, a jade cup appeared out of thin air. The cup's mouth turned, and all the attacking force was swallowed. With the protection of this treasure, he could continuously send out his magic power. He wasn't afraid of being countered by the other party at all. Instead, because of this, the Pan Gui couldn't block the Tai golden bead. Daoist Xian Che and the old man hurriedly wanted to escape. Originally, after taking out the Pan Gui, they were prepared to use it to hold back the enemy and find an opportunity to escape. But the more they did so, the more they couldn't find an opportunity. Whether it was the magic artifacts in their hands or the power they could use, they were far inferior to Zhang Yan. They could defend one side, but they couldn't defend the other. At this moment, a sudden sense of danger flashed in their hearts, and they knew that the situation was bad. After a short while, they felt a great force fall on their bodies. They couldn't help but tremble and stiffen in place. After the Tai golden bead was shot out, there was no process at all. It directly fell on their magic power, and after it arrived, it would continue to attack them. This made it even more difficult for them to escape. If it wasn't for the protective magic artifacts refined by the creation fragments, they would probably have completely lost the ability to fight back. Seeing that the battle had progressed to this point, Zhang Yan understood that he had the situation under control. It wouldn't be difficult for him to take down the two of them as long as he fought steadily. In reality, if it wasn't for the fact that the two of them didn't have the will to fight and wanted to retreat first, and if they dared to fight him, it wouldn't be so easy for him to do this even if he couldn't change the result. But now, it was impossible for them to resist even if they wanted to. After a while, he raised his magic power again and again, and there was a huge gap between him and the two of them. Seeing that the time had come, he directed his mind and completely suppressed it. Even if Xian Che and Xian Che had treasures to defend themselves, they were already unable to endure the heavy burden from the continuous pressure. At this moment, when they were pressed down by this peerlessly powerful force, the magic energy and protection around their bodies finally collapsed completely, and they didn't have any ability to resist any longer. But at this moment, a wave of magic power appeared out of nowhere. Judging from its momentum, it seemed like it was trying to bring the two of them back. Zhang Yan sensed that there was a power very similar to Bushutian's Whaley in this power, and he immediately realized that it was the cultivator who controlled the land of creation behind Qing Qintian. It was obvious that this person saw that the battle had reached a critical point, and thought that Zhang Yan had used up all his trump cards, so he chose this moment to cut into the battle. Zhang Yan didn't know what method this person used, but there was no warning when he attacked. If it was someone else, they might have succeeded, but Zhang Yan was experienced in battle, and he needed to be constantly on guard against that existence in this void, so even at this time, he didn't forget to guard against the outside world. At this moment, a golden bell rang in his mind, and the power that was attacking him immediately weakened. When it reached the inner circle, there was nothing left, and he used Bushutian's power to lightly knock against it. But the other party clearly didn't want to give up just like that. Suddenly, everything seemed to stop, and a blurry figure condensed. Zhang Yan looked over and saw that it was a Daoist whose face he couldn't recognize. The Daoist bowed to him and said sincerely, "Fellow Daoist, you're too polite. We've offended you today, so can you let these two fellow Daoists go? If they come back, I'll definitely restrain them and won't disturb you again. Moreover, the void-leaving tribulation is coming, and it's not appropriate for us to fight at this time." Zhang Yan could see that the person in front of him was a phantom formed from the Whaley, and his true body was probably still hiding in the land of creation. His heart skipped a beat, but he didn't believe what he said at all. If spirit refinement cultivators were familiar with each other, then a promise would have some weight, but if they were enemies to begin with, then the promise wouldn't be trustworthy at all, and it would be normal for them to just turn around and throw it away. Moreover, the main reason why this person was plotting against the land of creation behind the four regions was to avoid that existence. With such a threat around, it wasn't something that they would really be unwilling to do just because they said they were. Now that he was at the last step, if he let these two people go, then what he had done today would be meaningless, and it would be impossible for him to find such an opportunity again. He immediately replied, "The place where you reside was originally left behind for Xian-che by the ancestor of this poor Taoist sect. There must be a reason why he chose to stay with the two of you. If the two of you had stayed there peacefully and not moved, this poor Taoist would naturally not have interfered too much. However, the two of you wanted more, so there is absolutely no possibility of reconciliation. Today, this poor Taoist has taken down these two people. I will personally visit your sect another day." After he finished speaking, he waved his sleeve, and the Taoist's figure suddenly shattered. They had communicated with each other through their consciousness. It seemed like they had talked for a long time, but in reality, it had only been an instant. At this moment, his gaze fell forward, and the endless Weili fell. Xian-che and Daoran disappeared at the same time, suppressing the two of them into Busu Tian. If he didn't agree to it, or if Busu Tian broke, they would never be able to come out again. Shen Chang and the others couldn't help but be shocked when they saw this scene. Not only did Zhang Yan easily take down two of his peers, but it was also because of Busu Tian's unfathomable Weili. Just now, if they were in his place, they would also be powerless to stop him. After Zhang Yan suppressed the two of them, he turned to look at the depths of the void. It seemed that this battle hadn't attracted that existence's attention, or that existence didn't have the time to pay attention to this place. However, this was in line with his intentions. He could take advantage of this time to do more things. First, he divided his attention to look around, trying to find the land of creation. It was very difficult to find these places amidst the boundless nothingness and the countless existences of life and death. Even that existence might not be able to do it. However, because of the previous collision with Xian-che and Xian-che's magic power, he could try to find the land of creation behind Clear Sink Chaotic Domain. This way, even if the chaotic domain and this place were closed, he would still be able to find it. Although this place was controlled, and it was difficult to break through it from the outside, like Busu Tian behind him, if there were any gaps that he hadn't made up for, he might be able to find an opportunity. Chapter 2039. With a thought, Zhang Yan prepared to absorb the auras left behind by the two of them and directly find Qing Chen's location. However, when he did so just now, he found that most of the auras left by the two had been erased or deliberately altered by someone else. If he followed this, he would definitely not be able to find anything in the end. Without a doubt, this was done by the Taoist just now. It seemed that the purpose of his arrival this time was not only to save the two, but also to prevent them from finding his hiding place. That was why he had erased their auras with a flip of his hand. This person's arrival this time was mostly due to some kind of artifact, and at the same time, he had used a portion of the power of creation. However, he did not leave any of his own auras behind. It could be said that he was ethereal and untraceable. Zhang Yan snorted coldly. This person thought that he had done it cleanly, but in reality, as long as he had really appeared, it was impossible for him to not leave any traces behind. In particular, this person had used a portion of the power of creation. For others, this kind of Weili might be very difficult to subdue, and it would be very difficult for them to find any clues, but for someone like him who was very familiar with the creation Weili, it might not be of much use. Of course, if this was all he was relying on, he might not be able to find the whereabouts of the land of creation. There was still a possibility that the other party had concealed it. Therefore, long before the two came out, he had already deduced where they were. Even if he did not have the clues in front of him now, he would just have to spend a little more effort, and it would not be a hindrance. After a little more deduction, a flash of light appeared in his eyes, and he looked in a direction. He immediately saw a place. It was somewhat similar to the land of creation behind the flowing chaotic territory, and it was slightly stronger, but it was still far from Bushutian's. He was able to sense that someone was looking at him as he looked in. That Taoist should have noticed his gaze as well, but he didn't show himself because of this. Instead, he lay dormant and didn't move. Obviously, he didn't want to expose too much about himself. He thought to himself. From the looks of it, this person had probably not passed the stage of understanding the truth. Otherwise, he would not have to worry about the fluctuations of his magic power, which would allow others to find out about him. However, he could not rule out the possibility that this person was doing this on purpose. He wouldn't jump to conclusions before seeing the person himself. Since he'd already found this place, he didn't continue looking because he was unable to do anything to this place of fortune. Fortunately, after the land of creation has been refined by someone, it is not impossible to seize control of it. It is just that it is very difficult. It depends on the skills of the person who controls it, and whether there are any omissions that have not been remedied. Since this place was left behind by the great underworld ancestral master, there would definitely be traces of the ancestral master's aura. For example, Bushutian had such an aura in his body that even he couldn't erase. The other party was not a descendant of the great underworld ancestral master. As long as his cultivation did not surpass the great underworld ancestral master's magical power, he would not be able to do this. This was something that could be used. This place was not his main goal this time. He could come back to it in the future. If it was possible, he wanted to find the other two places of fortune. As long as he could immerse his will into those ownerless lands, he would be able to instantly turn those lands into his own when he was in the void. That way, he would have 3 blessed lands under his control. Not only would he be able to protect his fellow bloodlines, but he would also be able to borrow even more power from them. In just a blink of an eye, he had already found the place of fortune behind the drifting chaotic domain. Because he had left an avatar of his consciousness there, even though the door of 2 worlds was closed, he was able to find it in an instant. His consciousness had passed through billions of years in the fully chaotic domain, but it only took an instant for the outside world to be completely under his control. Now that he had obtained another place of fortune, he made up his mind. At the very least, he would not return empty-handed. As for the auspicious chaotic domain, it would be a little difficult because the 2 worlds were not close yet. If he couldn't find it this time, he could only wait for the next opportunity. After splitting a strand of his consciousness to calculate and search for it, he focused his attention on how to save Quan Dao and Bing Kong. He said to Shen Chang and the others, "Right now, that person is entangled with someone and is unable to care about the outside world. Just now, our battle has not attracted his attention. This is a rare opportunity. Why don't we try to find where Wan Fong and Bing Kong are? If we can save them, we can reduce that person's strength and also increase the number of people we can fight against that person." Shen Chang and the others all had extremely solemn expressions. They were not worried that they could not find the 2 people, but they were worried that if they found them, they might directly face that person. It should be known that Quan Dao and Bing Kong were inferior to them in terms of cultivation, but there was no fundamental difference. Even so, they were easily suppressed back then. If it was them, the result might not be much better. However, at this moment, no one objected. First, they were now under Zhang Yan's protection. Second, they all had a clear understanding of the current situation and knew that what they were doing now was undoubtedly very correct. Blindly hiding in Bushu Tian was the most negative thing to do. Taoist Qing Sheng especially agreed with this, and he was even more radical. He suggested, "That person is constantly invading the world, and his strength is constantly increasing. Now that there is a chance, we should find a way to save the 2 people. This way, we can not only reduce his arrogance, but also increase our strength. Moreover, he is being held back by another Taoist, which means that the 2 people's strength is not much different. If we intervene now, we might have a chance to suppress him, and then this disaster can be solved." Taoist Shen Chang, however, was not so optimistic. He said, "No matter what, let's first see if we can save the 2 people. We can discuss the rest later. Also, we need to be as careful as possible when facing that person. Zhang Yan said, fellow Taoists, don't worry too much. Although I have never met that person, I have seen his strength. Although he is unfathomable, he is not unstoppable. Even if that person comes to deal with us, I will use Bushu Tian's Weili to help you hide in Bushu Tian. As long as you are careful, there will be no problems. Everyone present had been to Bushu Tian. For them, this place was not just a place, but a place that was always next to them. As long as they got permission, they could hide in it with just a thought, unless they were captured before they noticed anything unusual. The four of them nodded. Hearing Zhang Yan's words, they felt much more at ease. They immediately tried to sense the whereabouts of Luan Fang and Bing Kong. In the silence, there was no such thing as distance. The clash of spiritual power, some could be seen now, and some could not be found a long time ago. However, regardless of whether they had fallen into eternal silence or not, there would always be some remnants left, just that they were very weak. Each of them had come into contact with Quan Dao and Luan Fang in the past. Now that they were tracing the traces of their spiritual powers, they were not completely clueless. Zhang Yan also calculated carefully. In his opinion, that person would not deliberately hide this because there was no need to. That person must be very happy to see them leave Bushu Tian and took the initiative to find them. If that person directly used his spiritual power to trap the two people, then there was a higher chance of saving them after finding them. However, if the two people were trapped in a place similar to a place of fortune, then they would not have the ability to save them. They could only do their best. The five of them worked together to calculate and soon found the location of Quan Dao and Luan Fang. However, they felt as if there was an invisible barrier between them that prevented their spiritual power from entering. This was not only because of the difference in spiritual power between the two sides, but also because of the difference in realm. Just one line was the difference between heaven and earth. As long as their spiritual power was not enough, then they would never be able to touch the other side. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. If he used Bushu Tian's spiritual power and his spiritual power, there was a possibility that he could open this door. However, just as this thought appeared in his mind, there was an inexplicable sense of danger in his heart, as if it was not appropriate to do so. This immediately made him vigilant. Although he only needed one step to achieve his goal, after calming down and thinking about it, he gave up on this idea. He said, everyone, since we can't open this door, we will return. As long as Bushu Tian's place of protection still exists, we will still have a chance. Seeing this, Shen Chang and the other three knew that they could not do anything. It would be best if they could retreat. After all, the threat of that person was always there. Zhang Yan made up his mind and was about to lead everyone back to Bushu Tian. However, he sensed something and looked back. He saw a Taoist standing there with his back facing him. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed. He could clearly see the other person, but he could not sense the other person's existence. At this moment, a ray of sword light suddenly flashed out from nothingness and split the chaos in a split second. The barrier that they were unable to pass through just now suddenly shattered and two surges of mana surged out. That Luan Fang and Bing Kong actually broke out from within. At the same time, an incomparably oppressive Weili suddenly appeared, as if it wanted to surround them. The Taoist merely had his back towards everyone as he flicked his finger. As his sleeve fluttered, a vast and grand sword light suddenly soared into the sky and instantly tore it apart. However, the sword light interweaved and collided with the mighty force in the surroundings, and it just happened to seem as if the workings of the heavens had been shattered, causing the rumbling of the sword to actually enter into the hearts of everyone present. The Taoist did not turn around and only said, fellow Taoist, you can save them and leave. Quickly. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. Without hesitation, he waved his sleeve and immediately escorted Quan Dao, Luan Fang, and the other four people into Bushu Tian. At this moment, he heard a voice that seemed to be coming from a boundless place. The sword rises from the heart, slays all, and cleaves the heavens. Then, he saw a spiritual light in the shape of a sword pill suddenly appear in his mind. His heart moved, and he immediately gathered it into an unknown place. Just before entering Bushu Tian, he looked again. The sword light and the mighty force were all gone, but in the silence, there was still a sword mark. Chapter 2040. Zhang Yan sensed that the two rippling auras were still colliding. He knew that the battle had not completely ended and was still ongoing. Because it involved a higher level, he could not sense it. However, he believed that the senior did not have a high chance of winning. If he could defeat that existence, then he would not have tried to rescue Quan Dao and Shen Chang. He could have waited until that existence was expelled before doing so, or he could have simply ignored it. Now that he had helped them, he guessed that the senior was probably trying to strengthen his own forces. In the future, when someone had accumulated enough strength, he could go over and help them to defeat that existence. However, regardless of whether that was the senior's intention, he had indeed helped them buy time. However, even if it was a battle between two people with similar strength, the slightest mistake could lead to failure. In order to help them this time, that Taoist must have paid a great price. In other words, the battle that was originally going to last for a long time would be shortened because of this. However, if he could reach the level where he could intervene before the battle ended, he might really be of great help. Thinking of this, he did not look anymore. He took a step forward and sank into the sky. At this moment, the people who had returned first were waiting there. Quan Dao and Shen Chang were the same. When they saw that Zhang Yan had returned, they hurriedly came up and bowed solemnly. They said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist. If not for you, we would not have been able to return alive." Then, the two of them bowed to Shen Chang and the others. "Thank you, fellow Taoist, for saving us this time." Zhang Yan said, "If the two of you want to thank someone, then thank that fellow Taoist. If not for him, we would not have been able to help the two of you escape from that place." Quan Dao and Shen Chang looked at each other. One of them said, "We seem to know about this person's background." Zhang Yan already had a relatively accurate guess about the identity of that person. He waved his hand and said, "Since that fellow Taoist did not reveal his true identity, there is no need to look into it. It is good that everyone knows, there is no need to say it out loud." Everyone nodded. Spirit refinement cultivators all had their own taboos. They could feel that that person had refused to turn around and only showed his back to them. It was not that he did not want to face them, but once he did so, something unfavorable or unexpected might happen to them. Before they understood the specific situation, it was best not to mention these things. Shen Chang Taoist let out a long sigh and said, "In the past, I only knew that existence was powerful, but I didn't expect him to be this powerful. We were like babies before him, unable to fight back." Everyone was speechless. After this encounter, it could be said that they directly realized the gap between them. When the extremely oppressive Weili appeared, everyone felt that they were utterly powerless to resist it, and it was even to the extent that it was extremely difficult for them to circulate their consciousness. It seemed as if they couldn't even teleport back. If it wasn't for that Taoist slashing the chaos with his sword, then not to mention rescuing the two of them, it was already not bad for them to be able to protect themselves. In reality, with Zhang Yan by their side, even if there was danger, he could still send everyone back in time and would not really be trapped in the outside world. However, the strength of the other party still made them feel a lingering fear. Taoist Qing Sheng's expression was solemn. The fellow Taoist who wielded his sword in the sky was extremely powerful, and he admitted that he was far inferior to him. However, even such a person could not defeat that existence. Moreover, this Taoist was currently fighting with that existence. However, if this Taoist was defeated, then the latter would be completely unrestrained, and his strength would definitely be stronger than before. At that time, how could they fight against him? Could it be that they were really going to hide here? Zhang Yan said, "If you don't want to wait for death, then you have to find a way to fight against that existence. Although Bushutian can protect you for a while, as his power gradually increases, it may not be forever." Taoist Qing Sheng said, "Fellow Taoist is right. This time, being able to rescue the two of you is already a setback for the enemy. When there's a chance, we still have to find a way to stop him from succeeding. In short, we can't let him easily devour all of you. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Among everyone, Taoist Qing Sheng's thoughts were the most unfathomable. Moreover, he was pursuing the Tao within himself, and his ultimate goal was also similar to that existence. Similarly, before he achieved his goal, that existence would be the biggest obstacle on his path of Tao. Thus, at present, their goals were still the same. He turned to Quan Dao and said, "Previously, I promised the two of you to enter this place of protection. Today, I will fulfill my promise. The two of you can choose a place to stay here. In the future, when we fight against that existence, we will still need the two of you to help." "No, fellow Taoist is too serious. We will listen to fellow Taoists' arrangements. If you need our help, we will certainly comply." Quan Dao and Taoist Qing Sheng hurriedly replied. Even though Zhang Yan said that their escape this time had nothing to do with him just now, they understood in their hearts that if it wasn't for Zhang Yan bringing people to rescue them, how could they have been saved by that existence? Even if they could escape, they would not be able to enter the place of protection. Thus, they secretly remembered this favor in their hearts. Zhang Yan did not intend to settle everyone in Bushutian. Instead, he wanted to separate them. After discussing with Taoist Xinchang and Boy Xinchang for a while, he arranged for the two of them to stay in the place of fortune in fully chaotic domain. That place was relatively weaker than Bushutian, and the two of them did not have many thoughts about it, so they did not covet it. However, the world was unpredictable, and some things were not absolute. With his consciousness incarnation there, as long as such an intention appeared, he would immediately suppress it. As for the rest of the people, they still stayed there. If they could occupy the place of fortune behind fully chaotic domain in the future, he would also arrange for some people to enter. As long as he had Bushutian in his hands, he did not have to worry about any accidents. After making all the arrangements, he separated from the others. Then, his consciousness moved and he arrived in an empty world. After he took Taoist Xian Che and Daoren into Bushutian, they were suppressed here. The two of them could not cultivate here, nor could they come into contact with anything in the outside world. They could only barely use their magic power to maintain themselves. Zhang Yan looked at the two of them. At this point, as long as he was willing, he could slowly cut off all ties with the outside world and force them into eternal silence one day. However, considering that Taoist Xian Che was a disciple of the great underworld patriarch, it was inconvenient for him to do so. Moreover, the other person might be of some use, so he left him here for now. When the two of them saw him, their expressions were unfriendly, but there was nothing they could do. They could only stay silent. Zhang Yan said, "The two of you should stay here. If I can deal with the threat from beyond the sky, it will be the day when the two of you will be free. However, if the two of you are willing to fight against the tribulation of leaving the sky, I can consider it and let the two of you out first." If the two of them were willing to fight that existence together, he could let them out. Even though the promise of the spirit refinement realm could not be kept, it was not up to them in the void. Daoren was very unwilling. He sneered a few times and said, "The outcome of the battle has not been decided. The place of fortune is still in the hands of our fellow Taoist. Don't you think it is too early for you to say that?" Zhang Yan said indifferently, "The outcome of the battle is between me and that fellow Taoist. It is not up to you to decide. If I see that fellow Taoist, I will invite him here to meet the two of you." When he finished speaking, he waved his sleeves and left. When he left, the two of them suddenly felt that they were trapped by a whaley. Not long after, their consciousness also became dizzy. Since it was a suppression, Zhang Yan naturally would not let them have an easy time. Moreover, Bushutian was not without loopholes. If he gave them too much time to think and calculate, it might give them a chance to escape. Therefore, he increased the pressure so that they could only fight with all their strength and could not rest for even a moment. Under such circumstances, they could not do anything else, which could save them a lot of trouble. After Zhang Yan left that place, he returned to the Qinghuan Palace and sat down on the praying mat. Then, with a turn of his spirit, the item that the Taoist left for him appeared. It was an item shaped like a sword pill. It looked extremely bright and did not contain any impurities. It seemed to be able to repel any external force. Just by touching it, one would feel that all methods were silent, and the wailing stopped. There was a burst of emptiness, and it was very difficult to see what was inside. After trying to examine it, he knew that with his current cultivation, he would not be able to truly understand the use of this item. If he used Bushutian's Weili, he might be able to forcefully push it forward. However, after thinking about it, he knew that it was not appropriate to do so. After thinking about it, he felt that it was better to wait until his cultivation improved before he could understand this item. With a turn of his spirit, he hid the item and calculated. He found that as the three chaotic domains separated from the land of creation, the last one, Ji-Yuan chaotic domain, was about to connect with the land of creation behind it. The door of two realms could open at any time. He was also determined to obtain this place, but if he wanted to obtain it like the land of creation in the flowing chaotic domain, he would have to enter the void again. This time, they had gone out with the help of the Taoist, so that existence could not do anything to them. However, if they went out again, it would be very difficult to say. If they were targeted, they might not be able to smoothly escape. He thought for a moment. If the timing was right, it was not impossible to achieve this. However, before that, he should first sink his consciousness avatar into the land of creation. Thinking of this, his eyes flashed. This time, another door of two realms had appeared. He did not know what choice the Taoist behind the Qing-Qin chaotic domain would make. If that person did not have a shocking opportunity, he could only stay in the land of creation and not dare to come out. He would also have to worry about being discovered by that existence. Overall, he was at an absolute disadvantage. The other party should understand that it was impossible to win just by maintaining the current situation. Sooner or later, the boundary would be taken back by him. However, if he managed to seize the good origin region first, then he would be able to change the current situation greatly, and he might even be able to go against him. A single clone was clearly not enough to do that, unless he came here in person. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. This time, he would wait for the other party to come. If he could suppress this person into Bushutian, then the entire four domains would be in order. At that time, he could focus on cultivation. Chapter 2041. Zhang Yan sat in the middle of the bushy sky. A long time passed before he realized it. At some point, he sensed something in his heart. He opened his eyes and saw that the door behind the clear sink chaotic domain was gradually closing. The auspicious chaotic domain was very close to the domain behind him. He only needed to use his magic power to push the door open. He didn't hesitate. With a thought, a spiritual light appeared in front of him. However, he only separated a wisp of his consciousness to go in. His main body was still outside. He wanted to see if the Taoist in the clear sink chaotic domain would choose to attack at this time. If the Taoist didn't come by the time the door closed, then he could only wait and deal with him later. What surprised him was that not long after his consciousness incarnation entered, he found a palace that was very similar to the Kun residence. The primordial underworld founding ancestor had split the four chaotic domains into four different places of fortune, and every single one of them was occupied by a direct disciple. The most ideal situation would be for every disciple to possess a place of fortune and attain their own accomplishments. But this was actually impossible. Refining the spirit depended on both talent and luck. It was extremely difficult to achieve. Otherwise, the great underworld patriarch wouldn't have entrusted the oracle to Taoist Xian Che. The auspicious chaotic domain was supposed to be left to Taoist Sun Yu by the ancestral master. He was the one who had followed the great underworld ancestral master the longest among the four disciples, and his cultivation was the highest in the original four chaotic domains. Therefore, Luo Zhan and Miao Yu attached great importance to his opinion. Zhang Yan didn't see anything left behind by the great underworld patriarch in the flowing slip chaotic domain. But it was hard to say here. This palace might have been passed down by the patriarch. Just as he was about to investigate deeper, his heart stirred. He turned to look and saw a ray of light coming from the clear sink chaotic domain and spreading into the auspicious origin chaotic domain. Then, it suddenly gathered, and a Taoist covered in a robe appeared. This person's facial features were shrouded in a layer of light mist. Even his aura was blurry, making it difficult to distinguish his origin. When Zhang Yan saw this, he guessed that this person was perhaps famous in the past and knew many of his peers. Otherwise, there was no need to hide himself. Of course, there was also a smaller possibility, which was that this person's original cultivation method was like this. This time, this person was clearly prepared to fight with him, so he also came here with his true body. He must have used a lot of the power of creation here, as well as some ritual implements to achieve this. After all, the land of creation behind this person could not be compared to Bushutian's. Otherwise, this person would not have tried so hard to take this place. But what surprised him was that this person had already passed the enlightenment stage. He didn't know whether it was the last time, or he had already passed long ago and deliberately showed weakness to the enemy. The two sides stood there for a long time, and then the Taoist first said, "May I ask how my two friends are?" Zhang Yan said with a smile, "These two are still here. If you are worried, why don't you visit them in person?" The Taoist said, "You must be joking. I don't dare to go to your place, just like you don't dare to come to mine." Zhang Yan smiled. Now that he was going to go to the opponent's home ground, he really didn't have the confidence to win. In any case, the opponent was also the master of a place of fortune, and was much more powerful than his peers who had also passed this stage. However, what he said last time about paying a visit was not a lie. He would do it sooner or later. When the two blessed places of Fuli and Jiyuan could be used by him, he would have enough advantages. As long as he had enough power, he could try to break into the place where the other party was without waiting for the door to open. He didn't want the existence in the nothingness to find this place first, which meant that this place of fortune would be lost. Only when he had enough places of fortune in his hands, then he would have the capital to fight against the opponent. At this time, he asked, "How should I address you, Your Excellency?" The Taoist said, "I don't want to deceive you, but I can't tell you my Taoist name now. Before I became Taoist, I had a name called Sky Reaching." When Zhang Yan heard this, he was even more certain of his previous judgment. He said, "Fellow Taoist towering firmament, if you can withdraw from that land of fortune and return it to our hands, I can make the decision and grant you a place to stay." Taoist Sky Reaching snorted and said, "That's just living under someone else's roof. From then on, I can only listen to Your Excellency's orders. Why don't you consider my suggestion? However, I can take a step back and not ask for those 3 places of fortune. As long as you can give me 2, I can become your ally. From then on, we will advance and retreat together. What do you think, fellow Taoist?" Zhang Yan glanced at him and said indifferently, "I said long ago that this place was passed down by the ancestral master, so I definitely won't let it fall into the hands of an outsider." Taoist Sky Reaching said meaningfully, "Since fellow Taoist said that, it means that you don't know my origin. In fact, it can be said that I have a legitimate reason to take this place." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. Very few soul refinement cultivators would pretend to be their master because they couldn't. He didn't know how Taoist Xian Che's place of fortune fell into this person's hands, but if what he said was true, then this might be the reason. However, there was one thing that he didn't deny. He had called this person an outsider earlier. Since it was a legitimate reason, why would he use another identity? Wouldn't it be unnecessary? Therefore, although they might have some history, their relationship couldn't be too deep. However, since he had already said that, he didn't mind asking, "Then, may I ask what is the relationship between you and me?" The Taoist smiled, as if he had no intention of revealing the answer. Zhang Yan didn't mind. He said, "Since you don't want to speak frankly, then there's nothing for us to say. Let's decide the winner with our magic power." As soon as he finished speaking, he released a vast amount of magic power and pressed down on the Taoist Sky Reaching elder. He believed that the best way to fight against someone of the same generation was to use magic power. If he was stronger than his opponent, then he would be able to gain the upper hand. Taoist sky-reaching elder didn't show any weakness. He seemed to want to measure the true depth of Zhang Yan's strength, so he also spread his magic power and surged forward fiercely. When their magic power collided, the scene of the last time Zhang Yan fought Xian Che and Xian Che was repeated. The outer layer of Taoist sky-reaching elder's magic power collapsed one after another, and he was forced back like an ebbing tide. When Zhang Yan saw this, he didn't hold back and continued to push his magic power. Although he didn't think that he could defeat his opponent in one go, he naturally wouldn't let go of his advantage. However, at this time, he felt that he couldn't use all of his power. In fact, a part of it was missing. Taoist sky-reaching elder's magic power couldn't be said to be weak. In fact, it was far stronger than Taoist Xian Che and Daoren. However, it was impossible to do this by relying on himself. The only way was to borrow a part of his power from the Land of Fortune. This person's control over the Land of Fortune had obviously reached an extremely profound level. If he wanted to defeat this person, he would have to destroy the Land of Fortune in one go. However, this was obviously very difficult to do. Although Zhang Yan was Bu Su Tian's master, he wasn't Bu Su Tian himself. If he could completely use the Land of Fortune, then let alone deal with this person, he probably wouldn't have to fear even that existence who could destroy everything. He thought to himself, looks like if I want to seize the Land of Fortune, I either have to go back to the original method of combining the three territories, or I have to do something from the inside. Although Taoist sky-reaching elder's powerful attack had been nullified, he hadn't been able to turn the situation around. By the same logic, he could only rely on the Land of Fortune to protect himself, but he couldn't counterattack. Logically speaking, he had no chance of winning if the battle continued, but he still persisted. It wasn't difficult for Zhang Yan to notice that his opponent didn't have a strong will to fight. He was just stalling for time. As the battle grew longer and longer, he eliminated many possibilities, and he could more or less guess what his opponent could do next. The two of them fought for a long time. The Origin Realm was shaken by their magic power, and it seemed like it was about to leave the Land of Fortune. The Gate of Two Realms also showed signs of closing. At this moment, Taoist sky-reaching elder's aura suddenly surged. This time, he didn't seem to care about his own defense, and he used most of the Land of Fortune Wei he could mobilize to rush toward Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan understood that if the other party wanted to make a move, this would be the moment. However, he couldn't completely ignore this power, so he cautiously used his magic power to neutralize the attack. Then, his magic power surged, and he used the power of good fortune that he didn't have time to use to suppress Taoist Skirich, trapping him within. At this point, it was usually impossible for a person to escape, but he knew that things weren't so simple. His opponent wouldn't put himself in danger. Sure enough, Taoist sky-reaching elder said, "Fellow Taoist is indeed brilliant. Since I've come here today, I won't waste any more time with you." As soon as he finished speaking, a crystal ring flew out, and in a flash, he disappeared from the magic power, leaving only the crystal ring floating on the ground. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. This situation was somewhat similar to how Chao Ying's Dharmakaya disappeared. He looked toward the Gate of Two Realms. It was completely closed, but just now, his opponent must have sent his consciousness incarnation into it. He waved his hand and took the crystal ring. After a brief examination, he found that this magic treasure was interesting. If he wasn't mistaken, this item should have a main one and an auxiliary one. The spiritual vigor flowed back and forth between the two treasures. The main ring was left in the Land of Fortune, and the auxiliary ring was carried by the master. When the spiritual vigor flowed into the main ring, no matter how far the master was, it would bring back the person who carried the auxiliary ring immediately. However, this was not without a price. In order to resist his magic power, the auxiliary ring would stay here in place of the master. It seemed that Taoist sky-reaching elder had put in a lot of effort for this, even letting half of the magic treasure fall into his hands. However, if he was at a disadvantage in a direct confrontation, why would he think that he could win in a battle of incarnations? His mind changed. Judging from his previous words, could it be that he knew about the mysteries of the palace? He smiled faintly and kept the crystal ring. Since he could predict his opponent's actions, he was prepared. He just had to see what his opponent was going to do. Chapter 2042. Zhang Yan had returned to Qinghuan Palace, and as usual, he began to practice the inner and outer seeking technique. Whether it was to refine the four lands of fortune or to fight against that existence, he needed to be more powerful than he was now. There was nothing better than entering the second stage. Although a cultivator had passed the enlightenment gate and passed the most difficult hurdle of climbing the second stage, reaching this realm was not something that could be achieved overnight. He still needed to put in a lot of effort. For now, he could only rely on himself to slowly accumulate strength, just like when he was comprehending in Busu Heaven. He took out the crystal ring left behind by Taoist sky reaching, and with a thought, he returned it to a creation fragment. To seek Tao from the outside, he needed to comprehend this item and use the great Tao to reflect himself. Although he had the entire Busu Heaven and the floating lands of fortune, this item seemed to have little effect on him. However, a drop of water could form a river, and sand could form a tower. Even if the effect was minimal, it could still be used to improve. However, looking at the item in his hand, he thought of a problem. Creation fragments were not that easy to find. Qing Sheng, Shen Chang, and the others had searched for a long time, but in the end, they only found a few fragments. It was obvious that it was not easy. However, Taoist Sky Reaching and the others did not hesitate to refine it into a magic tool that could only be used once. This situation showed that he might have a lot of fragments in his hands. If it was accumulated over a long period of time, it would be easy to deal with. However, if it was taken from somewhere else or simply inherited the remains of others, then things would become very complicated. He could not help but think that even though Daoren was trapped, he still spoke arrogantly and was very unconvinced. Taoist Sky Reaching either had some tricks up his sleeve, or he had some unknown backing. Combined with the previous words of this person must have a lot of secrets. However, now that the door of the two realms was closed, he would not know what would happen next before he found the true location of the creation lands. In the best-case scenario, his consciousness incarnation would successfully refine this place. Then, with the creation lands of the three realms in hand, he would be able to take over the last place. However, if he was disturbed and failed, then he could only wait for the next time the door of the two realms opened. In the creation lands of the creation lands of the creation lands, Zhang Yan's consciousness incarnation sensed that before the door of the two realms closed, Taoist Sky Reaching's consciousness incarnation also appeared here. However, after entering this place, Taoist Sky Reaching's consciousness incarnation did not immediately challenge him. Instead, he quickly went into hiding. Taoist Sky Reaching's creation lands of the creation. However, he believed that if this person's strength could not be increased, then this method would be of no help to him in controlling this place of fortune. Because once their consciousnesses sank into the depths of the place of fortune, there would definitely be conflict, and at that time, he would still be able to find this person. If this was not Taoist Sky Reaching's will, then Yun Shen's Yen would he's consciousness would Yan's domain. This was probably related to the secrets of this land of fortune. Aside from the inexplicable origin that Taoist Skysplit had mentioned, it was more likely that Taoist Skysplit had obtained this information from Taoist Xian Che. Moreover, this possibility was even higher. After thinking about this, Zhang Yan changed his mind. In the next moment, he arrived in front of a palace that looked like the Kun residence. What Taoist Skirich was after might be this place. This palace was extremely mysterious. Although he could see it, he could not sense its location. It was as if this place did not exist to him. This piqued his interest. After some calculations, he discovered that this palace was closely related to the natives of this place. Living creatures would be born in places where spiritual vigor was nurtured. There was no exception to the boundless spiritual vigor of the land of creation. The native creatures here also had a Taoist lineage. Normally, this generation would join hands to guard this palace, keeping a close watch on the door. Every year, It would open once, and only cultivators who had made great contributions could enter. Since they had an indescribable connection with this palace, once these people were gone, they would no longer be able to enter the palace. Therefore, if he wanted to enter, he could only wait until then. Right now, there was still more than half a year until the next opening. He could enter this place by changing the memories of these natives, but after thinking about it carefully, he did not do so. Instead, he decided to wait. Half a year passed quickly. Another group of cultivators gathered in front of the main hall. After paying their respects, one of them walked out and walked towards the palace. Just now, he reached the steps of the hall, and the door opened with a loud bang. Zhang Yan glanced at him, waved his sleeve, and walked in. Logically speaking, no one present should be able to sense his presence, but he suddenly felt something. He looked in a direction and saw a boy standing there. His eyes were black and white, and when he saw Zhang Yan looking over, he revealed a look of surprise. He bowed to Zhang Yan and said, "May I ask if this Grand Supreme is senior brother Sunyu?" Zhang Yan could already see clearly that this boy had no past or future, as if he had been deliberately concealed. However, he was not a living person, but a manifestation of the array spirit. Since he said the two words, Sunyu, there was no doubt that he was related to the great underworld patriarch. He said, "I'm not Tao Master Sunyu, but I'm from the same sect as him." The Taoist boy said, "So this Grand Supreme is also a disciple of the founding master. I believe the Grand Supreme is also here for this palace." He turned his body sideways and bowed. "This palace opens and closes once a year. Please enter, Grand Supreme." Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and walked. Soon, he arrived at the hall. After looking around, he saw that there were many mysterious patterns on the walls. The native cultivator who came in first was sitting inside, comprehending the patterns. However, he could not sense the two of them. He did not pay much attention to it and continued walking with the boy. Soon, they passed the main hall and arrived in front of a thick wall. The Taoist boy said, "This is where the inner palace is." Zhang Yan asked, "What's in here?" The Taoist boy shook his head and said, "I don't know either. I'm only responsible for guarding and have never entered the inner palace. If the Grand Supreme wants to enter, you need to take out a token." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He had made some preparations before coming here. One was the secondary seal of the Duzhen Hall Master, and the other was the secondary seal of the sect master that he borrowed from Taoist Sunyu. Anyone who had this was equivalent to the sect master of the Ji Yuan sect coming in person. He had always thought that the place of creation behind the Ji Yuan chaotic domain had a deep relationship with the Ji Yuan sect. If he had Taoist Sunyu's seal, it might be helpful to him. He might have to use it here. With a thought, a jade seal flew out. However, it was not the secondary seal of the Ji Yuan sect master, but the seal of the Qinsang school's Duzhen Hall master. He decided to try it first to see if he could open the door. If it did not work, he would use it to exchange for the secondary seal of the Ji Yuan sect master. After the seal made a circle in the air, it suddenly stopped. A spiritual light bloomed from it and fell on the wall of the hall. After a while, it seemed to melt, revealing a door that could be used to enter and exit. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. It seemed that the ancestral master's attitude towards the younger generation was not obviously biased. It was very likely that he treated everyone equally. Whoever found this place would be the lucky chance of that person. He wanted to see what was inside. The Taoist boy was happy to see the door open. He looked inside and said, "Senior brother, please come in." Zhang Yan walked inside and found that it was empty except for a shrine platform in the middle. There seemed to be something on it, but he did not immediately go up to take it. Instead, he sensed it and said, "Is this the end?" The Taoist boy said, "Yes. If the Grand Supreme wants to take anything else, you need to go to another palace." Zhang Yan said, "Oh. There is another place." The Taoist boy said, "Yes, there are two palaces. One is above the water, and it is managed by this Taoist boy. It is called Chasing Sun. The other is below the water, and it is called Chieftain. It is managed by a brother of mine. However, that palace needs the keepsake left behind by the ancestral master. Just now, it would not have appeared otherwise. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed slightly. The other palace was a little unexpected. It seemed that Daoist Skysplit's purpose for coming here was related to this. When he thought up to this point, the shrine platform shook and the item flew down. On the other side, Daoist Skysplit's consciousness incarnation had found a large waterfall. He took out a jade pendant from his sleeve and raised it high. Then, he bowed to the waterfall 3 times. When he finished bowing, he found himself inside a wide palace. A look of joy appeared on his face. He formed a hand seal and summoned a child. The child bowed to him and said, "Are you senior brother Xianche?" Daoist Skysplit waved his sleeve and the jade pendant flew out. It landed in front of the child and said, "Fellow Daoist Xianche won't be able to come for the time being. Bring me to the rear hall." The Daoist boy didn't dare to disobey. He led Daoist Skysplit to the rear hall. The jade pendant flew into the air and opened a door. Daoist Skysplit walked into the room and looked at the item placed inside the shrine platform. In reality, occupying this land of fortune wasn't his true goal. He had come for this item. What kind of treasure was this? It couldn't be used in battle, it couldn't be used for protection, and it didn't seem to be of much help in fighting against that existence. But judging from the current situation, it could be considered a supreme treasure. This item could help a cultivator sense the essence of fortune. To be sure, a cultivator could use it to find more places of fortune. In fact, he knew very well that even if he had this thing, it wouldn't be easy to accomplish such a thing. Because the world was constantly changing, the land of fortune was constantly shifting. At most, it would slightly increase the chances of success. But even so, it was already pretty good. If he couldn't seize this land of fortune, then he might be able to rely on this to find a way out. He stretched out his hand and gestured, and the object on the shrine platform flew down and landed in his hand. But before he had the time to be happy, his expression sank, and he flipped it around a few more times. A trace of shock and anger appeared on his face, and he suppressed his voice and said, "Why is there only half?" Chapter 2043. Zhang Yan looked at the magic artifact in his hand with a profound gaze. Because this place of fortune had originally been left for Dao Master Sunyu, he had speculated that the great underworld patriarch had left behind some kind of opportunity to guide him to spirit refinement. If that was the case, it would not be of much use to him, but after obtaining it, he could return it to Dao Master Sunyu. If he could obtain another person of the same lineage, he would naturally be very happy. However, even with such an item, it would be extremely difficult for Dao Master Sunyu to reach the upper realm. He could only rely on his own luck. However, if he could find a powerful magic artifact used by spirit refinement cultivators, then this trip would not have been in vain. In order to fight against that person, he would not mind anything that could be of help, even if it was very weak. Moreover, Daoist Skysplit's consciousness clone was here. Even if he himself was useless, he could not let this person obtain it. However, after observing it, he found that his previous guesses were all wrong. This was something that looked like a long shaft, but there was a gap at the top that seemed to be a mortise and tenon. Clearly, what he saw here was not the entire thing. Even though it was only a part of it, based on his senses, he could infer that it was used to help cultivators find places of fortune. However, he was cautious about how useful it was. But where was the other part? He raised his head. Apart from this item, there was nothing else in the Sun Chaser Palace. This meant that the other half might very well be in the other palace that the Dao child had mentioned. He pondered for a moment, then put the item away and asked the Dao child a few more questions. He could confirm that in the world that he knew of, apart from these 2 palaces, there were no other items left behind by the patriarch. He thought about it, and in an instant, the memories of the countless native beings here, as well as the changes in the heavens, were reflected in his mind. However, just as the Dao child had said, there was nothing else worth investigating. When he thought about Daoist Skysplit's secretive actions, he was almost certain that this person was heading for Crown Yin Palace, and his goal might be the long shaft. Although he did not have the token and could not go there, if Daoist Skysplit discovered that he had only taken a part of it, he should be able to guess that the other half was in this palace. Unless he gave up, he would definitely come looking for him. In that case, all he had to do was wait for him to come. With that thought in mind, he ordered the guard boy to leave on his own. Then, he sat down cross-legged in the hall, and his consciousness entered the depths of this land of fortune. Regardless of whether it was as he had guessed, towering firmament would have to wait until the gate of the two realms reopened if he wanted to bring out what he had obtained. However, if he could take control of this place before then, not only would he be able to reconnect the two realms, he would also be able to kill the clone at any time. As soon as he entered this land of fortune, he had sensed the presence of an additional Whaley. It wasn't difficult to tell that it had been left behind by the great underworld ancestral master. Anyone who tried to take control of this place would find it obstructing them if they couldn't get along with it. On the contrary, if he were to go with the flow, he might be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. With a thought, the deputy sect master's seal that Taoist Sun Yu had given him appeared. As soon as the seal appeared, it floated in the air for a moment, and light immediately shone down on his divine will. In an instant, he felt a sense of clarity. Just now, the barrier between him and this world had disappeared. His divine will and magic power flowed smoothly like jade beads. At this moment, he looked down and vaguely saw the location of the origin root in this land of fortune. He immediately understood that this place was indeed a fortuitous encounter left for Taoist Sun Yu. Because whether it was in Busu Tian or the land of fortune behind the flowing muddy territory, the ancestral master didn't leave any traces behind. Only this place was guarded by the formation spirit and clearly mentioned his disciple's name. Perhaps Taoist Xian Che could be considered one of them. However, for some unknown reason, the latter didn't follow the ancestral master's instructions. However, this shouldn't be because the ancestral master favored his disciple, Sun Yu. He believed that the real reason was that the ancestral master had made preparations for the rest of the land of fortune to fall into the hands of others. Once such an outcome occurred, this land of fortune would be quickly taken over by his disciples, and it would become the last place to protect their descendants. With the ancestral master's wily help, he could now directly see where the origin root was. He only needed to find a way to fuse it into his body, and the speed of refinement would be many times faster. Perhaps he would be able to completely control this land of fortune in a few years. If Taoist Skysor still hadn't appeared by then, he could only take him down. Inside the Crown Yin Palace, Taoist Skysor walked around the hall and confirmed that only half of the magic artifact in his hand was there. He also thought that the other half must be in another palace. However, he didn't dare to go there now because he knew very well that there was no reason for Zhang Yan not to notice such a large area. Zhang Yan must have already occupied that area before he did, and perhaps he had already obtained the other half of the magic artifact. After thinking about this, he quickly calmed down. He looked at his hand, and the long scroll in his hand immediately disappeared. He had stored it into his divine will. Even though it was only half, it could still be used. He didn't believe that Zhang Yan wouldn't be tempted after seeing the function of this item. Right now, he only needed to hide until the door of two realms opened again, and he could use his divine will to send this item back. At that time, he would be able to propose an exchange or other conditions. In reality, if he was here, he definitely wouldn't make such a compromise. He would definitely stake everything on one throw and directly try to seize it. Logically speaking, the consciousness incarnation of a soul refinement cultivator wasn't completely the same as the main body, but they were still very similar. However, because of his own cultivation technique, the incarnation's way of thinking wasn't completely the same as the main body. This shouldn't have been a problem. As long as his main body was still there and their consciousness was connected, he could turn it to the right path that he agreed with. However, the door of two realms was closed, and they were separated from each other, so he could only let the incarnation act on its own. Soaring Heaven's consciousness incarnation originally thought that he could wait until the door of two realms opened again. However, after waiting for a few years, he was horrified to find bursts of pressure coming from his surroundings, as if they were rejecting him. This situation was clearly telling him that this place of creation was about to be controlled by someone. He was immediately surprised and bewildered, and he thought, how can it be so fast? Even though he knew that if he allowed Zhang Yan to do things here, this day would come sooner or later if he didn't stop him, it would take at least tens of thousands of years. There was no reason to see the result in just a few years. He suddenly thought of a possibility. Unless Zhang Yan had some kind of token like him, it was highly possible. His expression darkened. If that was the case, he had to go and stop Zhang Yan right now. Otherwise, when Zhang Yan became the master of this place, not only would he not be able to escape, but he would also not be able to give away that half of his artifact. Thinking to there was a flash of light, and he left Crown Moon Palace. He arrived in front of Sun Chasing Palace and walked in until he arrived at the back of the palace. Zhang Yan had been sitting there the entire time. When he sensed Soaring Heaven's arrival, he shook his sleeves and stood up. He slowly turned around and said to the person, "Fellow Taoist, you've finally come. I have been waiting for you for a long time." Soaring Heaven looked at him and said in a low voice, "Just now, I've come here. Outsiders can only enter through the hands of the natives, so why don't you kill all the living beings here? That way, I won't be able to come here, and I won't be able to stop you." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "It doesn't matter whether you come here or not, it won't affect the overall situation. I don't need to do something so unimportant." The great underworld ancestral master might have casually placed the restrictions on the natives, but as a junior, out of respect for the wise sages, there was no need for him to destroy it. Moreover, the battle between spirit refinement cultivators wasn't a small matter, and if they fought in the palace, it wouldn't affect the outside world. Taoist Skirich coldly snorted. With every passing moment, Zhang Yan's control over this land of good fortune grew a little deeper. He didn't dare to delay any longer. Multicolored light scattered from his body as his magic power surged out. Zhang Yan stood there without moving. He activated his magical power and faced it head-on. With a loud noise, the entire palace swayed. However, all of the power was restrained here, unable to shake the world in the slightest. Soaring Heaven was at a disadvantage as soon as the battle began. He felt that the pressure coming from the other side not only contained Zhang Yan's magic power, but also the Wei of this land of fortune. This meant that Zhang Yan could use the power of this place to a certain extent. He immediately knew that he had no chance of winning, and that defeat was only a matter of time. However, he did not feel embarrassed because he was forced to a dead end. Instead, he threatened, "Have you ever thought that if I spread my divine intent and magic power out of this place, that existence might notice this place? If that happens, even if I can't occupy this place, you won't be able to obtain it either." Zhang Yan's expression did not change at all. He said indifferently, "You can try, sir." Indeed, if that existence in the void sensed this place, because this place was still ownerless, there was a chance that it would be devoured. However, this did not mean that he could not stop it. Although the other side still had some strength left, if he wanted to send his magic power and even his divine intent out of the world, he would have to see if Soaring Heaven agreed or not. What's more, he was certain that the other side would not dare to do so. This was because this consciousness incarnation was condensed by the main body and not formed by magic power rippling into the world. So, once it entered the world, that existence would notice this place, but it would also be easier to connect to the main body's location and expose itself. As expected, Soaring Heaven had misgivings and did not dare to do so. After a few breaths, under the heavy pressure, his magic power was gradually exhausted. At the last moment, he suddenly laughed and said, "Sir, don't think that you've won. If I can't obtain it, then don't even think about obtaining it." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure suddenly dissipated, and all traces of him entering this world were instantly wiped clean. Zhang Yan stared at the place where towering firmament had disappeared and fell into deep thought. At this moment, he could not sense anything left behind by towering firmament. Combined with his last words, it was clear that towering firmament had used some unknown method to hide the item. Chapter 2044. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. He didn't mind losing these things. It was fine as long as he didn't let Taoist Skysore take them. No matter where he put the half-artifact, it was still in this land of creation. He could try to find it after he took control of this place. There was no need to worry about it for now. He made up his mind and immersed his consciousness into the depths of this world. Because he had seen the origin heart, with the help of the great underworld patriarchs Weili, it only took him a few months to completely refine this place. The entire land of creation was under his control. It was just that the great underworld patriarchs Weili hadn't completely melted away. This was normal. There were many foreign powers in Bushutian that hadn't been erased yet. However, this didn't stop him from becoming the master of this place. Now, he could try to find that half-artifact. He spread his consciousness and instantly looked through all the worlds of creation. He didn't miss the hidden Crown Eam Palace either. However, he didn't find anything out of the ordinary. Although he didn't find it, he was sure that Taoist Skysore had hidden it with the help of the great underworld patriarchs Weili. Otherwise, it was impossible that he couldn't find it. When he thought about the token to open the Forbidden Palace that the Taoist child had mentioned, he already had an idea. Taoist Skysore probably didn't know that if he borrowed the great underworld patriarch's Weili, Taoist Sun Yu's seal would be the most important thing in this world. Even if he obtained something from Taoist Xian Che, it would still be useless. He spread his sleeves and took out the Ji Yuan sect master's seal again. He then focused his consciousness on it. A moment later, he sensed something in his heart. He turned his consciousness and instantly escaped into an unknown place. As soon as he arrived, he saw several objects floating around. The most eye-catching among them was a jade pendant. He only needed a glance to recognize that it was a token of the same bloodline. Before Taoist Skysore's consciousness incarnation collapsed, he must have used this jade pendant as a guide to hide these things. The second object floating here was a withered branch. It wasn't refined from a fragment of good fortune, nor was it a magic treasure. A layer of lustrous light revolved around it, preventing external forces from entering it. Zhang Yan could sense that this thing was extremely fragile. If he tried to forcibly peer into it, or even try to determine its past and future, it would most likely collapse. He didn't know why Taoist Sky Higher had left it here, but logically speaking, it would have been better to bring a magical artifact with him than this thing. He pondered for a moment. Since this thing posed no threat, there was no need to worry about it for now. His gaze fell on the last item. It was half a long shaft, exactly the same as the one in his hand. Obviously, it was the other half of the magic tool. After looking through them, Zhang Xian made up his mind and took these items with him out of the divine will. He stretched out his hand and picked up the jade pendant. He discovered that he could sense the location of the Crown Eam Palace with it, and he could enter it at any time. He pondered for a moment. This jade pendant might be related to the land of good fortune behind the clear sink chaotic territory. It might be useful if he came down, so he put it away for now. Then, he looked at the other half of the long shaft. With a thought, the other half of the shaft also appeared out of thin air. When the two items were placed together, they immediately attracted each other and released a spiritual light at the same time. In the blink of an eye, they were completely restored. When he looked at it again, it was no longer a long shaft, but a pair of jade shafts that were side by side. It looked like a picture scroll that had been folded together. He sensed it and found that it was difficult to control it with just his magic power. Thus, he reached out and held the two shafts, slowly separating them. In an instant, he felt his divine will expand, and he felt as if he was in silence. He could see countless worlds appearing and disappearing. He immediately understood that this thing could help him see all the changes in the silence, and he didn't need to use his own consciousness or body to appear in the world. From the looks of it, this item was indeed very useful in searching for a place of fortune. It could avoid that existence during the search. As for how to obtain it after finding it, that was another matter. He could think of a way to deal with it later. His divine will wandered through the evolved silence, and he found that it was just as he had expected. Although this thing could help cultivators sense the land of good fortune, its use was extremely limited, and he couldn't rely on it too much. However, the chance of finding it was greater than before, which was still good. He flicked his sleeve and put away the 3 items. Then, with a thought, the door of 2 realms suddenly opened, and his consciousness returned to his body. In the Qinghuan Palace, Zhang Yan opened his eyes. Out of the 4 lands of good fortune, 3 were now in his hands. He thought that even if he could achieve this step, it would be a long time later. He didn't expect it to be so smooth. At this moment, he could feel an endless stream of energy surging into him. This was because the path he took contained the Tao of seeking external help. As long as he possessed the essence of good fortune, then his cultivation would be able to grow continuously after he comprehended it thoroughly. As he saw more of the principles of the Grand Tao, he could faintly see some of the profundities that led to the second stage, and he couldn't help but be slightly moved. It was no wonder that none of the fellow Taoists around him could reach this stage. Because even though it was possible to directly reach this stage by relying purely on cultivation, the process would be extremely long. Only by seeing these things would one have the chance to take a step forward. He wasn't the only one who could see these profundities. After a cultivator passed the gate of enlightenment, they would meditate for a long time, and if they were lucky, then they would be able to comprehend these profundities at a certain moment. Perhaps some people would notice it when they first passed the gate of enlightenment, or perhaps they wouldn't be able to see it for a long time, and it would purely depend on their own luck. But now, it was entirely because of the Weili that converged the 3 lands of good fortune. He instantly broke through the heavens, and just now, he was able to see a trace of the profundities. It was just that the lands of good fortune were extremely difficult to find. For cultivators who walked the path of seeking Tao outside, they would fight for nothing more than these things. If he obtained some at this moment, then the others would inevitably go less. There was an invisible contradiction, because the person who advanced the fastest would undoubtedly be the one who blocked everyone's path. Fortunately, there was no need to think about this now. With that person's existence above, those who sought Tao outside would be unable to cultivate even if they wanted to. Therefore, before defeating that person, these contradictions could be concealed. Therefore, for some people, this great calamity could be said to be an opportunity. He thought about it for a moment. Right now, there was only the land behind the Qingchen chaotic domain that was not under his control. Based on the creation Weili that he could mobilize, even if the gate of 2 realms behind the Qingchen chaotic domain was firmly controlled by Taoist sky reaching, because the 4 domains were connected, he could still use the great Weili that he possessed to forcibly push open the gate and directly kill his way to the Qingchen chaotic domain. He wasn't in a hurry to go there. Even though he had fought Taoist sky reaching several times, he still didn't understand this opponent very well. After all, he was going to fight in Taoist sky reaching's home ground, so he needed to make more preparations. When he thought up to this point, his thoughts changed, and he went to the nameless domain that was suppressing Taoist Xian Che and Daoren. Ever since Zhang Yan left last time, Taoist Xian Che had been resisting the omnipresent pressure around him with all his might. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt his body lighten, and finally regained his senses. When he looked up, he saw that it was Zhang Yan in front of him, and his eyes couldn't help but narrow. With a thought, Zhang Yan drew out the jade pendant and let it float in the air. He asked, "Does this belong to you, fellow Taoist?" When Taoist Xian Che saw this, his expression immediately changed. He said, "Could it be that the land of good fortune has already been seized by you?" Then, he said, "No, if that's the case, there's no need for you to come see me. Looks like Towering Sky really obtained this item from you, sir." Zhang Yan put the jade pendant away and said, "I have some questions to ask you, sir." "It's fine if you're not willing to answer them." Taoist Xian Che was silent for a while before he said, "What do you want to ask, sir?" Zhang Yan said, "First, why is the token in Towering Sky's hands?" Taoist Xian Che sighed and said, "Back then, I acted according to teacher's arrangements. If everything went smoothly, I would have achieved something. However, I encountered some difficulties in my cultivation, and I couldn't enter the upper realm for a long time. At that time, I received Towering Sky's help, and the doubts in my heart were resolved. Just now, I'm able to enter the upper realm. Because of this, I owe him a favor. Zhang Yan said, he wouldn't help you for no reason. Taoist Xian Che said calmly, I also know that the void separation tribulation is right in front of us, and he just wants to seek protection in a land of fortune. If it wasn't for Teacher Weili's protection, he wouldn't have been able to enter. Why would he be so polite to me? He must have barged in first and snatched this away. However, I was able to succeed because I owed him a favor. Considering that I couldn't defeat that existence on my own, I joined forces with them. Zhang Yan looked at him and said, even so, Sir should be the leader. Why did Towering Sky become the leader instead? Taoist Xian Che said, this is because fellow Taoist Towering Sky's cultivation is the highest among us. With him controlling this place, it would be easier to fight against that existence. Speaking up to this point, he cupped his hands and said, that's the truth. I've already told you everything that I can tell you. Some of the secrets that involve fellow Taoist Towering Sky, so forgive me for not being able to tell you now. Zhang Yan glanced at him and didn't ask any more questions. He suppressed Taoist Xian Che once more and turned around to return to the main hall. This person's words were half true and half false, and he was also very secretive. He avoided talking about how Towering Sky had colluded with him, his background, and his relationship with the ancestral master. After listening to him, he was certain that the truth was far from as simple as what he said. Fortunately, he didn't expect this person to tell the truth. However, even if it was all false, he could still obtain some useful information from it to help him understand this enemy. Inside the Cloud's Palace, Taoist Towering Sky was sitting on a long rainbow, using the land of creation to observe the profound principles of the Great Tao. However, he felt a sense of unease for some reason. He tried to divine it, but he couldn't find anything. However, because the existence's magic power was fluctuating endlessly, it was obvious that he hadn't finished off his opponent yet. Therefore, he was certain that the danger didn't come from the silence. He immediately thought of his consciousness incarnation, and his expression couldn't help but turn solemn. If he failed this time, the land of creation behind the auspicious chaotic domain would definitely fall into Zhang Yan's hands. He could imagine that person's next step would be to come for him. This time, if he didn't have a way to deal with it and lost another opportunity, there would be no way out. Chapter 2045. Zhang Yan looked into the depths of the void. Now that he had 3 places of fortune in his hands, he had more confidence. The battle in the void was still going on, but the fluctuations of that existence's aura were much more stable than before. Although the signs were not very obvious, the appearance of such a trend meant that the other side was slipping in the direction of defeat. If he wanted to go forward and help the battle as he had previously planned, he would need to move as fast as possible. He pondered for a moment. If he wanted to successfully take back the last land of fortune, the safest way was to cultivate to the second stage. This would allow him to subdue his opponent with absolute strength, and he could guarantee that no accidents would occur. However, he also knew that although he had comprehended the key point and reached this stage much faster than others of the same generation, he could not be sure how long it would take. The battle in the void could end at any time, and if he delayed for too long, it was very likely that he would not be able to make it in time. After that existence had won and digested the results of the battle, he would definitely come to Bushutian. After all, this place had long been exposed. At that time, he was afraid that he would only be able to deal with that existence with all his strength and would not have the time to recover that place. Therefore, after thinking about it repeatedly, he decided not to delay any longer. He would go to the place of fortune behind the clear sink chaotic domain as soon as possible and take it back. Judging from the magic power of both sides and the amount of Weili that could be used, there was no doubt that he was currently superior to his opponent. However, this place was still Taoist Sky Reaching's home ground, and he would have a great advantage, so this battle would definitely not be easy. This was because this time, he needed to fight with Taoist Sky Reaching directly. Even if he did not go to the void, he did not know how long he would be away from Bushutian. Therefore, before that, he still had to sort out the situation behind him. He immediately sent a message to invite Zhang Yuan and Qing Sheng. After a detailed discussion with them, he invited the two of them to stay at the Ji Yuan Place of Fortune. This was to prevent this generation from having any ulterior motives, and if they were to make a move, it would be convenient to suppress them. Zhang Yuan and Qing Sheng were not on the same side, so they could restrain each other. The two of them did not resist. Obviously, they also knew that this was inevitable. After saying goodbye to him, they went their separate ways. Seeing this, Zhang Yan couldn't help but nod. As a result, all the spirit refinement cultivators who came to seek protection were placed separately by him, and because the two worlds were closed, without his permission, it was difficult for them to contact each other. Even if something happened, he could use the Weili to suppress it with a single thought. He raised his hand and took out the jade pendant he had obtained from Towering Firmament's clone. After taking a look at it, his gaze became profound. This item originally belonged to Taoist Xian Che. Logically speaking, he should be able to use the Weili left behind by the ancestral master after he went to the Soaring Sky Realm's blessed land. He should be able to occupy that place even more smoothly. However, he had no intention of using it on this trip. Although this item had been seized by him during the battle with the consciousness incarnation, and everything seemed reasonable, he still felt that there was a problem. The problem lay with Taoist Xian Che. If it was said that Taoist Xian Che had taken the initiative to relinquish control of the land of fortune back then, it might have been because he was forced by the circumstances. However, it was very inexplicable that he had even given up the keepsake passed down by the patriarch. When he thought of this, he flicked his sleeve and suppressed it into the depths of Bushutian. After that, he took out another 2 creation fragments and refined them into 2 magic tools. After inspecting them once more and making sure that there were no mistakes, he spread out his magic power and walked out of the Qinghuan Palace towards the clear sync chaotic domain. This time, he didn't conceal his aura. As his magic energy surged, it caused the 4 great chaotic domains to shake violently. Although the 3 Dao venerables in the chaotic domain couldn't see where Zhang Yan was, they knew that the Exalted One had to be on a journey. Just now, they would cause such a commotion. Dao Venerable Miaoyu transmitted his divine intent, the Exalted One is going to the clear sync chaotic domain. Senior brothers, is the Exalted One going to seize that land of fortune? Dao Venerable Luo Zhan said, I think so. Dao Venerable Sun Yu said, not long ago, the Exalted One came to borrow the seal of the Ji Yuan sect master. He said that it would be used to store the Ji Yuan sect in the lower realms. Yesterday, the seal returned, so this place must be settled. Among the domains, this is the last one left outside. Dao Venerable Luo Zhan said, this is the place where the ancestral master allowed me to hide. It would be best if I could retrieve it in time. Then, it wouldn't be difficult to avoid the tribulation of leaving the void. As for the dispute between the Exalted One, they had no way to judge. Although Luo Zhan and Miaoyu had been suppressed by Zhang Yan previously, they knew that after Taoist Xian Che passed away, the one who occupied the land of fortune now wasn't of the same bloodline. If that outsider won, he definitely wouldn't be polite to them. Therefore, they could only hope that Zhang Yan would return with success. Zhang Yan walked into the clear sync chaotic domain. When he looked up, the original land of fortune was already far away, and the door between the 2 realms had long since closed. With a thought, he pushed with his magic energy, and a door opened in front of him. The process was very smooth. As the master of the land of fortune on the other side, Towering Sky didn't stop him. Zhang Yan couldn't help but nod inwardly. It seemed that his choice was undoubtedly correct. If he waited until his cultivation was more profound, he would undoubtedly have an absolute advantage against this person. However, this person would definitely try to stop him from entering the domain. Although he would definitely be able to enter in the end, he didn't know how much time he would have to waste here. Now, on the surface, the difference in cultivation between the two of them wasn't very big. Even if he could borrow the 3 realms fortune Weili, he couldn't completely control it in Towering Sky's domain. In fact, this person had the opportunity to suppress him. This should be the reason why he didn't obstruct him here. At this moment, he moved his consciousness, passed through the door, and landed on the other side. Suddenly, he felt as if he had fallen into a stagnant place. Heavy pressure surged in from all directions, adding countless burdens to his body. He knew that because he had entered the other's domain, all the creation Whaley here were resisting him. And the creation Whaley that he could use was imperceptibly weakened a lot. However, just like the 3 domains he had refined, the great underworld grandmaster's Whaley still existed here. Obviously, towering sky couldn't completely dissolve it. He sensed his opponent's location, and with a thought, he moved there. Looking up, he saw Taoist towering sky sitting in the sky. He was wearing the glazed light divine heart robe and a colorful glazed lotus crown on his head. Auspicious clouds surrounded him, and rays of light shone behind him. After he took control of this place, the heavenly priests called him, once the world is cleansed, the outer Tao is refined into the rainbow. Thus, the beings of fortune here worshipped him as the rainbow ancestor. When he saw Zhang Yan, he stood up, cupped his fists, and said, "You're here, fellow Taoist. I've been waiting for you for a long time." He had thought it through before he dared to let Zhang Yan enter this place. After all, he had the geographical advantage, and Zhang Yan couldn't use his power much if he wanted to. Moreover, he still had a trump card that he hadn't used yet, so he thought he had a certain chance of winning. In truth, he was afraid that Zhang Yan would take so long to arrive. Zhang Yan had occupied 3 places of fortune, so there was no doubt that Zhang Yan's cultivation had improved faster than his own. The later he arrived, the smaller his chances of winning would be. Therefore, even though he had missed several opportunities in the past, he had no choice but to take a gamble. Zhang Yan stood still outside, raised his sleeves, and bowed. After Taoist Skirich was done bowing, he said slowly, "When I first came here, I was invited by fellow Taoist Xian Che. Later on, he trusted me greatly, and I entrusted him with the keepsake. That's how I'm allowed to occupy this place. May I ask why you've come to attack me?" Zhang Yan said seriously, "Back then, the founding master gave Xian Che a command token to take care of his fellow sect members after he achieved success. He didn't want him to give the realm under his rule to an outsider. This was a private act, and after he achieved success, not only did he not protect his own sect, but he also stole his own. Today, I have come to take back this place on behalf of the founding master and the other sections." Taoist Skirich smiled deeply and said, "Fellow Taoist, I'm afraid you don't know the full story. It's true that the founding master above you is amazing, but didn't he steal these chaotic realms from someone else? If that's the case, it's only natural that I occupy this place." Zhang Yan's expression was indifferent. He didn't argue with him at all. The fact that the great underworld founding master's Whaley could be considered the greatest proof of this. Moreover, no matter how Taoist Skirich quibbled, he had obtained this place through Taoist Xian Che. This was a fact that couldn't be denied. It was also possible that the founding master obtained this place from someone else. After all, the land of creation was ownerless in the first place. If someone discovered it, it would inevitably cause a dispute. However, if you want to talk about this, you must first have the same status, seniority, cultivation, and magic power as the great underworld founding master. You haven't even reached that level yet, so it's meaningless to talk about this. Taoist Skirich also knew that he couldn't refute Zhang Yan with just this. Even if he brought out some evidence, it would be useless if Zhang Yan didn't admit it. He only mentioned this matter to make it easier for him to act. His tone softened slightly as he said, "Fellow Taoist, there's actually no need for us to be so hostile towards each other. With that person outside, us fighting here would only be benefiting that person. If you want this place, I can very well give up this place of good fortune." Zhang Yan's eyes flashed slightly. He looked at him and said, "What are your conditions, fellow Taoist?" If Taoist Skirich was willing to surrender or resolve the matter in a peaceful manner, it wasn't impossible for him to consider it. Although this would leave behind many problems, forcefully subduing Taoist Skirich wouldn't necessarily solve everything. Just as Taoist Skirich said, dealing with that person was the most important thing. If the other party's conditions weren't too excessive, he didn't want to haggle over it. Taoist Skirich said, "This land of creation can belong to you, fellow Taoist, but you must let me stay here for a period of time. I'll still be the master of this place. When the two realms close again, I'm willing to give it to you. This way, we can avoid a conflict." Zhang Yan thought about it for a moment. Taoist Skirich should have some kind of objective. Normally, he wouldn't be afraid, but right now, he needed to advance a realm as quickly as possible before that person escaped. The only way to accomplish this was to take over the land of creation of the four regions. It was destined that he couldn't agree to this, so he replied, "Please forgive me for not being able to agree to your request, fellow Taoist." Chapter 2046. Taoist Skirich couldn't help but sigh after being rejected. He said, "What I said just now was to put an end to the conflict between our two sects, to fight against the enemy together. However, even though I was sincere, fellow Taoist didn't allow it. It looks like this matter can only be resolved through a battle between us." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. Taoist Skirich's words pushed the blame of starting a war onto him. Although he didn't know why Taoist Skirich was so calculative, he naturally wouldn't let his opponent get what he wanted. "You must be joking. I rejected your proposal not because I want to fight you, but because this place of fortune is mine to begin with. Even fellow Taoists said that you're only borrowing it, so why would I insist on fighting?" Taoist Skirich's eyes flickered slightly. Taoist Skirich sighed softly. It was hard to tell if he was sincere or not. He cupped his hands together and said, "Since I have nowhere to go, I can only fight with all my might. If I offend you later, please don't blame me." Zhang Yan bowed in return and said indifferently, "You've been talking for a long time, so I presume you've already made your arrangements. I will have to experience your brilliance today." He could naturally tell that Taoist Skirich was setting up something after he entered this world, so he was using words to delay. However, he had no intention of stopping him. Taoist Skirich was on his home ground, so even if he didn't speak to him, he could still use other methods to accomplish this. Moreover, it wasn't as if he didn't gain anything. Taking advantage of the time he had just now, he had thoroughly deduced and sensed this place of fortune, so he had a rough idea of what was going on here. Taoist Skirich didn't say anything else. He waved his sleeve, and a rumbling sound echoed throughout the land of fortune. Endless rays of light sprinkled down from the sky, accompanied by a mighty tide of magic power. With a thought, Zhang Yan's profound energy instantly grew behind him, stirring up boundless mysteries. Thunderclaps reverberated through the worlds and stopped the rays of light. In the past, when he fought others, it was difficult for anyone in the same generation to stop him once he used his magic power. Almost all of them would be forced back on the spot, and even if they were locked in a stalemate for a moment, they would try to avoid him and not fight him head-on. However, this time, both of them seemed to be evenly matched. This wasn't because Taoist Skirich's magic power was enough to resist him, but because the two of them were currently in a place of fortune controlled by someone else. Although Zhang Yan also had the mighty power of the three lands of creation that he could borrow, his own mana could be generated at will. However, the mighty power of creation was not like this. Within the towering heaven's boundary, it had to come from the outside and could not be generated out of thin air. After passing through this layer of barrier, the effectiveness of the mighty power was greatly reduced. It was equivalent to using his own strength to fight the enemy, which was why such a situation occurred. Fortunately, he had already expected this before he came, so he was not too surprised. Not long ago, Taoist Skirich had transformed into an avatar to save Xian Che and Xian Che, so he had witnessed the entire battle between Zhang Yan and Zhang Yan. Among them, Zhang Yan's tyrannical magic power was what he was most afraid of. Now that Zhang Yan had blocked the attack, he immediately calmed down and thought that he had a chance of winning. He said, "Fellow Taoist, you have made a mistake. If you had arrived later, I would not have been able to defeat you. However, you rushed here in such a hurry and gave me a chance." Zhang Yan simply smiled and did not argue with him. If he had not arrived at this moment, there was no way that Taoist Skirich would have come out to fight him so easily. Moreover, even if he could not easily overwhelm his opponent with his magic power, he was still superior to him. It was just that it was not as obvious, and he could not see any advantage in this. However, for someone like him who was used to fighting, as long as they continued to fight, it would not be difficult for him to accumulate small victories into big ones, and small victories into big ones. Both of their magic power clashed dozens of times. It looked like they were surging violently, but in reality, they did not use any real tricks because both sides were still probing each other. Once soul refinement cultivators engaged in a battle of magic power, it was very difficult to conceal too many things. Through this kind of battle, one could roughly determine each other's depths. However, cultivators who had passed the enlightenment stage could conceal certain areas, so if one wanted to truly understand their opponent's strength, they would have to continue probing and deducing during the battle. Even though Taoist Skirich had the right time and the right place, he was still very careful at this moment. He constantly observed Zhang Yan's movements and repeatedly pondered how he could restrain his opponent. He had no choice but to be so cautious because this was the only place he could entrust himself to. If he were to lose this battle, there would be no way out unless he escaped into the void. However, that existence might not let him go. Zhang Yan did not know much about Taoist Skirich either. Even though he had fought with the consciousness incarnation before, he did not think that he could determine his opponent's true strength with just that. At first, the incarnation was merely a Weili, and did not have any traces of itself. Later, the consciousness incarnation went to search for the arcane artifact, so it could be seen that it did not want to compete with him for the land of fortune. As long as it was careful, it would definitely not reveal too much about itself. So, if he used that as a reference, he would definitely make a wrong judgment. Against an opponent who could be said to be an unfamiliar opponent, and one who had fallen into his opponent's territory, he would naturally adopt a steady approach. After probing for a long time, the two finally began to reveal some of their techniques. Taoist Skirich was the first to summon an arcane artifact shaped like a star. It revolved around his body, and wherever the light passed, it could repel external magic power, allowing him to attack and defend at the same time. Zhang Yan didn't stand on ceremony. Before he came here, he had casually refined two magic tools precisely for this moment. With a point of his finger, a strand of clear energy descended. When the golden light shone upon it, it dissipated. Everywhere the clear energy passed, it swept away all foreign forces. Moreover, it was present everywhere, making it difficult for others to see through its mysteries. The two venerable ones were fighting here, and this time, they were not consciousness incarnations. Furthermore, Taoist Skirich was repeatedly using the Weili of Fortune to help him. When their magic power collided, who knew how many realms would collapse? If this continued, it would definitely refine the myriad realms and skies here, leading to the death of countless living beings. Most of these living beings were the cultivators of the various realms who had worshipped Taoist Skirich in the past, and there were also the disciples he had taken in when he opened up the world here. As the ruler of this place, it was very simple for him to protect them. He only needed to divert a portion of his power to slightly protect them. But now that he was fighting with Zhang Yan, although he looked calm on the surface, in reality, he had to calculate the usage of every bit of power. How could he bear to do such things? So he simply ignored it. Moreover, as the Grand Supreme of the refined God realm, even if all the realms collapsed and all the living beings died, as long as he won this battle, he could rebuild it with a single thought. As the battle between the two gradually intensified, the entire realm finally fell into chaos. Other than the collision of the Weili, it was no longer possible to distinguish the past and the future. Zhang Yan had experienced many battles along his path of cultivation, and it wasn't the first time he had fought against his peers in the refined God realm. He was very good at seizing opportunities and deducing battles, and could be said to be very experienced. Therefore, although the two sides were still fighting back and forth, inadvertently, the momentum of victory was gradually tilting towards his side. Taoist Skirich originally thought that he had a chance of winning this time since he could defeat his opponent with his magic power. But as the battle progressed, he discovered that there were flaws in every one of his calculations. He always felt like he was being restrained in every aspect and couldn't relax. Although he had calculated countless times in his mind every time he attacked, and logically speaking, there shouldn't be any flaws, it was a completely different matter when it actually happened. This was especially true when he was fighting against someone of the same generation. It was even more impossible to calculate every step of his opponent's movements. The winner here depended on past battle experience and the cultivator's own skills. Daoist Skirich realized that if he didn't handle a certain part properly, he would most likely be forced into a disadvantageous position. Then, he would be defeated by Zhang Yan like Xian Che and Ren Du, and this land of fortune would also be handed over to him. When he thought of this, his heart also palpitated. Before he could actually land on that step, he shook his sleeve and threw out a stacked conch. Zhang Yan felt his vision darken, and the world around him suddenly changed. Originally, when he looked up, it was a boundless expanse of emptiness, but now, the place he was in was divided into countless twisting boundaries, and they were constantly twisting and changing. He didn't know what kind of artifact it was, but it actually sucked him in so quickly. Normally, there was no artifact that could trap a refined God Realm cultivator, not even a supreme treasure of fortune. Therefore, this place must have been set up in the surroundings in advance, and it was connected to this world. As long as he entered this place, it was equivalent to entering this artifact. He sensed for a moment, and at this moment, there were only two ways to escape. The first was to use his own magic power to break the barrier and directly charge out, and the second was to follow the rules of this place and find the exit. Because this artifact was connected to this land of fortune Whaley, it was very difficult to force his way out, so after he came to a conclusion, he calculated in his heart to find a way out. Daoist Skirich couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief after he stopped the battle and stopped Zhang Yan from winning. However, the battle wasn't over yet, so he also calculated in his heart, trying to find a suitable artifact to use in front of him. But no matter how he thought about it, he found that there was nothing that could help him. Immediately, he changed his mind and refined an artifact purely for calculation, wanting to use it to help him find a way to win, but after repeated calculations, he found that he didn't seem to be able to do anything to Zhang Yan, and his heart couldn't help but sink. According to his original plan, after this battle, he would suppress Zhang Yan here, and then try to subdue the three realms, completing what Xian Che couldn't do before. But he also considered the possibility of failure, so he still had a backup plan. As the master of this place, if he wanted to, he could find a way to expel outsiders, but Zhang Yan was different. He also had the land of fortune Whaley behind him, and relying purely on his own magic power and the power he summoned might not succeed, so he refined a complementary artifact. At this moment, he waved his hand and took out the artifact, then stared down below, waiting for Zhang Yan to come out so he could expel him. As for the future, as long as this land of fortune wasn't lost, he could eventually think of another way. Zhang Yan didn't stay in the Spiral Palace for long, but he already calculated the way to enter and exit this place. He used his magic power, and the surrounding barriers collapsed, revealing the original world. But at this moment, he suddenly felt a powerful force coming from everywhere, as if it wanted to push him out of this land of fortune. Chapter 2047. As the master of the three blessed lands, Zhang Yan knew very well that if the master wanted to expel outsiders, the outsiders would find it very difficult to resist. Normally, even if the master was in control of the blessed lands, he wouldn't be able to use all of his power. However, there was one exception, and that was when he wanted to expel outsiders. Because this was in accordance with the will of the entire world, the master would receive the greatest response from the blessed lands. However, since he had come here today, he had naturally considered this point. Otherwise, wouldn't he have come here for nothing if he was easily expelled? The Whaley of Fortune was very difficult to resist, but it wasn't impossible. It depended on who was being expelled. If one was strong enough, they could forcibly stay. However, this kind of wearing down was disadvantageous to outsiders in the end. Because the more the two sides clashed, the more likely they would be pushed out. They couldn't relax because of this, because if they didn't move out, they would be pushed in. If they were even the slightest bit careless, they might be suppressed into the depths of the blessed lands. At that time, they wouldn't even be able to retreat. Before he came here, he had thought of several ways to deal with this. One of them was to pry open the land of fortune from the inside. Perhaps it was because all the places of creation had been occupied by powerful beings from outside, and there was a lot of strange energy left in them. If it was used cleverly by someone later on, there was a possibility that the world would change hands. Take Bushutian as an example. Although Zhang Yan was the master, he was unstable because of the strange force in his body. If he was not careful, someone could take advantage of him. Bushutian had taken this into consideration when he separated the soul refinement cultivators. There were a lot of the great underworld patriarchs Weili left in the blessed lands. This was a place he could use. With a thought, the seal of Hall Master Duzhen of Qinsung School flew out. Since he could use the power of the great underworld patriarch in the Ji Yuan place of fortune, it should be possible here as well. Daoist Xian Chei's jade pendant was the best, but he suspected that there was something strange about it, so he didn't use it. As expected, as soon as the seal appeared, it released rays of light. When it sprinkled down, the entire blessed land started to tremble. Zhang Yan immediately felt the pressure on him lighten. He knew that the seal had taken effect. This move was not to borrow the power of the ancestral master to fight against the mighty force of creation, but to destroy the current state of unity, causing it to be unable to respond to the master at the same time. The power that could be used would be completely lacking, and its power would be greatly reduced. Daoist Skirich immediately sensed this change, and a cold smile appeared on his face, as if he had known this would happen. Since he had occupied this land, how could he ignore the great underworld patriarch's Weili of fortune? He had long considered the possibility of this power being used by others. With a flick of his sleeve, he took out a jade pendant. This pendant was almost identical to the one his consciousness incarnation had brought with him. It hovered in the sky, and the mighty force that had been stirring up was immediately pacified. What Zhang Yan had seized earlier was actually only the accessory, while the main one was with him. When he sent out his consciousness incarnation, he had anticipated the possibility of losing the accessory pendant. This was actually a flaw that he had deliberately left behind. If Zhang Yan had taken out the accessory pendant today, not only would the Weili immediately calm down, but it would also be able to suppress Yin with Yang and send it out in an instant. What made him feel a little regretful was that Zhang Yan did not summon this item. He did not know whether he did not obtain it or did not bring it with him. At this moment, Zhang Yan also saw the jade pendant and could not help but narrow his eyes. There was indeed something wrong with this thing. Fortunately, he did not rely on it. It was just that he could no longer stir up the strange power in this place, and the power that had originally dissipated in the surroundings came again. However, he was not completely helpless. He had also thought about what to do if he could not borrow the power, so he had a backup plan. With a wave of his sleeve, a jade cup flew into the sky. With a flip of the cup's mouth, it immediately swallowed up a lot of Daoist Sky-Reaching's magic power, slightly reducing the pressure outside. However, under the impact of the creation Weili, it shook violently. Fortunately, he only needed this buffer. With a thought, a beam of golden light shot out. It was the Tai Golden Pearl, but it did not fly towards Daoist Sky-Reaching. Instead, it fell directly into the depths of the land of fortune. This was a supreme treasure of fortune, and it had the power to shake the heavens and overturn the universe. If it was just the treasure itself, it would not be able to exert much power. For example, even though Daoist had possessed a body full of Weili, the amount he could use was extremely limited. However, things were different now. Zhang Yan had poured all of the Weili from the 3 lands of fortune into the pearl, then activated it. In an instant, the treasure burst forth with unprecedented power. Boom! The entire land of fortune began to shake because of this. Daoist Sky-Reaching's body trembled, and his expression changed. He felt that the Weili, which he had been able to control freely, had suddenly become extremely chaotic. This kind of collision force was naturally born by the lands of fortune, and it did not affect him much. As long as he calmed down and slowly sorted out his thoughts, he would be able to stabilize himself. However, the prerequisite was that there was no enemy nearby. Now that he had to expel his enemy and calm the land of fortune, he was in a difficult situation. After Zhang Yan threw out the Tai golden pearl, as the entire land of fortune was stirred, he felt the restraints on his body recede once more. He could see that this was very useful, and continued to activate it. Under the repeated collisions, the power that the treasure could exert was even greater. This was because the Wali of the three lands of fortune were originally blocked outside, and now that this area had been shaken by the Tai golden pearl, it had become chaotic, so it was easier for external forces to seep in. If this continued, as long as he wanted to, he might be able to subdue the entire land of fortune, and even turn the tables. However, with a quick thought, he suppressed this thought and even slightly restrained his momentum. This was because at that point, the land of fortune would fall into complete chaos, and it would no longer be able to protect them. Only when he became the master could there be peace, but before that, it was very likely that that existence would take advantage of the situation to invade. Fortunately, the current situation was enough. Because the order of the universe had been completely disrupted, the qi of the world had become extremely chaotic. Taoist Sky-Reaching couldn't straighten out his meridians, and he couldn't summon enough power to expel him. When Taoist Sky-Reaching saw that Zhang Yan had turned the situation around in the most impossible of circumstances, he was greatly shocked. He hastily made a hand seal, and a large barrier that seemed to cover the sky appeared and pressed down. This was a treasure that he had hidden all this time, and it was a supreme treasure of fortune born in this world. Logically speaking, every land of fortune could give birth to such a treasure, but this was not the case in reality. This would only happen when the essence of fortune was condensed to a certain level. For example, a place like Busu Tian would give birth to a supreme treasure every era. Although this place was second to Busu Tian, it was higher than the Ji Source realm and the Fuli realm, so it was easier to give birth to supreme treasures. Not only that, if a cultivator cultivated here, they would have more opportunities to observe the upper realms. Back then, the great underworld patriarch had guided Xian Che to this place, and if there were no accidents, the latter would be able to obtain this treasure. It could be said that this treasure was originally left for Taoist Xian Che, but he didn't look after it, and in the end, it fell into the hands of Sky-Reaching. At this moment, Zhang Yan only felt the top of his head darken. At this moment, all senses of the outside world had been cut off, and his connection with the treasured cup had been severed. Moreover, this feeling was gradually deepening. Only the Tai golden bead was still in his mind, and he immediately realized that this might be a supreme treasure of fortune. He thought about it for a while. Taoist Sky-Reaching was undoubtedly trying to force him to call back the Tai golden bead to help him in battle, so that he would have a chance to catch his breath. If the sky cover had been refined perfectly by the other party, he would rather use his own mana to support it than to take back the Tai golden bead. But at this moment, he could see that for some reason, the qi dynamic between this magic treasure and the towering sky tower did not match, so there was no need to be too afraid. After thinking about this, he waved his mind, and the golden bead landed on the treasure, immediately revealing a chance of survival. Then, with a turn of his mind, he was out of the sky cover, and without hesitation, he pushed back his mana towards the towering sky tower. At the same time, he controlled the Tai golden bead to continue attacking this world. Taoist Sky-Reaching felt that the situation was getting more and more out of control. Under the Tai golden bead's rampage, he had no way to borrow strength, and could only use his own mana to resist. How could he be a match for Zhang Yan in terms of pure mana? As he retreated again and again, his mana also collapsed, and it seemed that defeat was not far away. But Zhang Yan did not relax, and instead kept an eye on the towering sky tower's movements. Just now, when he was freed from the spiral palace, he already understood one thing. Taoist Sky-Reaching was in a hurry to drive him out, which meant that he did not have much confidence. This person looked strong on the surface, but in reality, he was incomparably weak. However, he needed to guard against the towering sky tower dispersing his mana and divine will into the void. After all, that person's consciousness clone had once threatened him with this. If that person did not exist in the void, then he could just drive him out. But now, if he did not stop him, he would attract that person's attention, and without the master of this place, he would not be able to protect it. So, just defeating this person was not enough, he needed to find a way to suppress him. As long as he could do this, and as long as no one disturbed him, he could try to refine this place. Taoist Sky-Reaching indeed wanted to escape from this place of fortune and head into the void, but if he fell into Zhang Yan's hands, he would at most be trapped and suppressed. If he was targeted by that person, then he would fall into eternal silence. So, in the end, he did not do this, but he was not willing to admit defeat, so he stubbornly held on. Zhang Yan saw that the time was about right, and with a thought, the tiny golden pearl suddenly smashed onto Towering Firmament's body. Towering Firmament's body shook, and his magic power was completely dispersed. After that, a vast wave of magic power swept up his body, and he instantly felt the world spin while his consciousness sank into unconsciousness. Zhang Yan had successfully suppressed Taoist Sky-Reaching, and he had achieved his goal. However, he still did not relax. Instead, his expression became solemn, and he looked in a certain direction. There was an impending trouble that needed to be dealt with immediately. Chapter 2048. Zhang Yan understood in his heart that the battle from before was a little too intense, and it caused this place of fortune to lose its original state of harmony, causing the dermic energy and vital energy of the outside world to seep in because of this. Especially since there were many spirit refinement cultivators' mana and chi dynamics mixed in. Before this, the mana of the cultivators of the Tao of Integrity and the Tao of Virtue was the most active. But now, in the silence, that existence was suppressing everything. Just now, the mana of this generation had just seeped in and was immediately repelled, leaving only this most powerful force to barge in. The original body was still fighting with that opponent and did not take the initiative to invade, but after the mana of the chi dynamics entered the realm, it also condensed into an incarnation. Although it was only an incarnation, it must be destroyed in time, otherwise it was very likely to attract the attention of the original body. At this moment, where his gaze landed, a blurry silhouette appeared. As soon as it entered, it continued to invade everything around it. Spiritual vigor, mighty power, and even all living things were within it. Relying on these, it was growing stronger every moment, and the silhouette was getting clearer and clearer. However, the strange thing was, it still gave off a feeling that it could not be seen clearly. The land of creation should have possessed boundless might, yet Zhang Yan was able to clearly sense that it was actually sliding towards the direction of destruction as the avatar devoured it. If he didn't do anything about it, then it was very likely that this area would vanish into nothingness in the end. Zhang Yan calmly changed his mind. At this moment, it was best to use the Tai golden bead to attack and kill this person. He believed that he could destroy it in an instant, but this land of fortune was too turbulent before, it was not suitable to use this treasure now. Therefore, with a thought in his mind, he immediately pushed a huge wave of mana and pressed towards it. The Chi Dynamics incarnation did not seem to care about this kind of attack at all, it stood still in the same place. In the next moment, all the mana directly passed through its body, not a single one of it landed on the real thing, it was as if it had only collided with a layer of illusion. Zhang Yan raised an eyebrow. Spirit refinement cultivators saw illusions as reality. With his arcane energy, even if there was an illusion in front of him, he would still be able to break it. This scene reminded him of the faceless Taoist. He still remembered that this person also had the ability to hide his body and not come into contact with external techniques. Later on, he used the creation Wei alone, and just now, he was able to force him out. In this way, it seemed like he had to utilize the same method in order to disperse this avatar. When he thought up to here, he immediately mobilized the energy of creation of the 3 dimensions and pressed it down towards the old man. However, when this fellow suffered the impact of the surging tide, it was like a gust of wind blowing on the surface of a lake, causing ripples to appear on it, and then it actually returned to normal. Moreover, it didn't pay attention to all of this because of this. Obviously, the absorption of the essence of creation was even more attractive to it. However, the creation Weili that came earlier only came from Jiyuan and Fuli, and the one that came later was Bushutian's Weili. This time, it was like a huge tide. Under this impact, the Chi Dynamics incarnation only lasted for a moment before it burst like a bubble, leaving no trace behind. Logically speaking, they were all creation Weili, so why was it that the power of Bushutian could restrain it, but the other powers of creation couldn't? Zhang Yan believed that the reason here was most likely that Bushutian had the richest essence of creation, and the other realms were not as good. This also meant that although the creation Weili could restrain the incarnation, it had to reach a certain level of power, otherwise it wouldn't be able to do anything to it. This was actually not good news. Bushutian's Weili might be able to deal with this fellow now, but it might not be able to in the future, because the existence's magic power was also constantly increasing. Of course, the creation Weili he mobilized this time was not all, and it might be one of the reasons. After all, he had not yet taken control of the land of creation under his feet, and all the power he used came from the outside. When he entered the realm, most of the power he used was first offset by this realm, and not much was left. He didn't know what realm the existence in the void was at, but he could see the whole picture with a glance. Even if it was just an incarnation, it was still so difficult to deal with, which showed how powerful it was. Therefore, hiding in Blissful Heaven was indeed not safe. If one wanted to protect it, they would either need to have absolute strength to contend with that existence, or they would need to find more places with the essence of good fortune and then refine it into Blissful Heaven. But this was something that needed to be considered in the future, and there was no need to change the current situation of the four realms. Not only was this arrangement left by the Patriarch, but there were also many internal matters that he had not sorted out. Take the realm of Bushutian for example, he had not even completely expelled the strange force from it, and there was still a gap before he could mobilize all the Weili here. If he forcibly combined the other places of creation, not only would he not be able to control it, it would also leave more flaws and foreign forces. Therefore, this matter needed to be put aside, and it would not be too late to make arrangements after he entered the second realm. He deduced in his heart that existence's avatar had been destroyed, but this matter hadn't truly come to an end. Because this place of fortune was still in an expanse of chaos, and external forces might arrive again at any moment. The only way was to settle this as soon as possible, so that he could plug these loopholes. At this moment, he could sense that the creation Weili and spiritual opportunity that had been swallowed and taken away by the incarnation had not been returned, but had disappeared into thin air. According to this, not only was the mighty force of creation bound to be swallowed and annihilated wherever the incarnation of that existence went, even the fragments of creation wouldn't be left behind, let alone the ordinary ones. No wonder it was said to invade and annihilate everything. He could not help but ponder in his heart. The existence's incarnation of the existence's chi could be said to be countless. If this continued, sooner or later there would be nothing left in the world, and the essence of creation would not be able to move around in the world. In the end, it would inevitably be swallowed up, and at that time, they would also not be able to escape. In this process, the existence's strength would certainly continue to grow, so if he allowed things to develop in this way, even if he could improve his realm in a short period of time, he might not be able to catch up with the existence. I must find a way to stop him. At the same time, it was also to buy time for himself. He was very clear that since there was a mighty figure challenging the existence, there might be someone who would come forward to stop him. However, no matter how those mighty figures did it, he could not put his hopes on others. This matter could not be done by him alone, but fortunately, there were those fellow cultivators who relied on the spirit refinement realm in Blissful Heaven, which could come in handy when the time came. These could also be considered later, but now he had to deal with the matter in front of him. With a turn of his magic power, he moved the master of this world, Taoist sky reaching Blissful Heaven, and then suppressed him in an extremely deep place. If there were no accidents, this person would not be able to turn things around with his own strength. Then, he sat in the sky and used his magic power to sort out the chi dynamic. After some effort, he quickly calmed this place of creation, and the chi dynamic from the outside world did not enter again. Next, it was time to slowly refine this place. With a thought, several items appeared in front of him, all of which were left behind by Taoist sky reaching. Among them, the most eye-catching was the jade pendant. Logically speaking, with this item, it would be easier to refine the Whaley of this place, but he felt that this matter was not as simple as it seemed. It was best not to use this item, so he put it away first. As for the artifacts refined by the creation fragments, they were all returned by him. Only the heavenly barrier, which was a supreme treasure of creation, was left floating in the air by itself. Zhang Yan judged that one of the reasons why Daoist Sky Reaching could not refine this item as he wished was that he was not compatible with this treasure. He could use the Tai golden bead freely because he had attained Dao in Bushu heaven, and the source of their power was similar, so it did not take too much effort to refine it. Daoist Sky Reaching should have attained Dao in another place, so he did not have a good fate with this treasure, which was why he could not use it freely. Of course, there was another possibility, which was that the original owner of this treasure was not dead, and was only temporarily in Daoist Sky Reaching's hands. If that was the case, then Daoist Sky Reaching wouldn't be able to unleash the treasure's full power. Although he could not verify this, he had a feeling that this was the case. If that was the case, then the original owner was undoubtedly Xian Che. But why didn't he use the creation treasure himself, and instead gave it to Daoist Sky Reaching? There was probably a more complicated reason behind this. He shook his head. There was no need to think about the reason now. Whether it was Xian Che or Daoist Sky Reaching, they were both prisoners, so no matter what schemes they had, it would be useless. After leaving an incarnation here to refine the place of creation, he returned to the Qinghuan Palace. After sitting on the jade platform, he flicked his finger, and rays of golden light instantly flew towards the places where the spirit refinement experts were staying. Not long after, the spirit refinement experts in the various places of creation didn't dare to be negligent, and all of them sent an incarnation over. Logically speaking, they should have come here with their original bodies, but Zhang Yan did not allow them to move their original bodies as they pleased, and the talisman did not state this clearly, so they could only follow the original rules. Zhang Yan waited for everyone to arrive. After greeting them, he invited them to take a seat. Then, he said, "Today, I have retrieved the last blessed land of my sect that was lost in the outside world. I believe that I will be able to refine it soon. However, after thinking about it, since I have retreated to this place, there is no longer any aura or power that can be transmitted to the outside world. This is equivalent to surrendering these lands and allowing that existence to do as he pleases. I believe that this cannot continue." When everyone heard this, they all began to consider. They could understand the threat that existence posed, but they did not have a suitable way to deal with it. Daoist Qing Shing agreed with this. He didn't want to just stay in this realm and do nothing, so he immediately replied, "Fellow Daoist is right. That person has turned all living things into his own resources. Who knows, when we speak, he might grow even stronger. If we don't think of a way to stop him, how can we fight against him in the future?" Daoist Shin Chang bowed and said, "What do you need us to do, fellow Daoist?" Zhang Yan looked at everyone and said, "We cannot sit idly by and watch it grow stronger. Just as fellow Daoist Qing Shing said, we must think of a way to stop it from invading everything. Even if we can't destroy the existence's avatar that entered the present world, we must still stop it." Chapter 2049. Inside the Qinghuan Palace, when the soul refinement cultivators heard Zhang Yan's words and recalled that he had summoned everyone here today, they guessed that he might have a specific plan. They looked at each other, then Daoist Zhang Yuan cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Daoist, do you have a countermeasure?" Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "After everyone retreated here, the magic power left in the outside world couldn't be controlled, and it would be difficult for it to pose a threat to that existence. It's a pity, so I thought of a way to use it again. Even if a soul refinement cultivator fell into eternal silence, his magic power wouldn't disappear on its own. It would only gradually weaken until it was so weak that it was hard to detect. Even so, there would still be some traces left behind, not to mention that everyone hadn't reached this level yet. As long as they could go to the void again, they could make their magic power stronger and fight against that existence's magic power. In this way, they would more or less be able to restrain that existence." Daoist Zhang Yuan asked again, "How exactly should we do it?" Zhang Yan said, I can refine a magic tool with everyone and store your energy inside it. Then, I can use the creation whale to help you appear outside. This way, you can spread your magic power in the void. Even if you accidentally encounter that existence, you'll only lose an incarnation. The creation whale is endless, so you'll just have to recreate another incarnation. In fact, Taoist Sky Reaching had used this method before. That day, in order to rescue Xian Che and Rendu, and because he didn't want to expose his true body to the void, he used this method to create an incarnation. Therefore, he was prepared to use this method, but he didn't need to completely copy it. Taoist Sky Reaching's incarnation not only borrowed the creation whale, but also used a magic tool refined from a fragment of the creation fragment to help him. The reason why he did this was to stabilize his form and make it easier for him to fight. But if he didn't pursue these things and just spread his magic power, it wouldn't matter. As long as he had the creation whale, it would be enough. Everyone thought about it and agreed. In any case, they didn't have to fight in person, and they could stop that existence from devouring everything. They were naturally happy to see this. Zhang Yan looked around and said, "There's one more thing. That person's dermic powers are too high. It's not easy for us to fight against him. Therefore, I want to try my best to find more allies in the void. Everyone, please pay more attention." Taoist Xinchang pondered for a moment and said, "Fellow Taoist, after the creation essence was broken, Taoist Sky Reaching, some fellow Taoists have disappeared without a trace. I don't know where they went. May still have traces of magic power, but they have probably entered the void." Zhang Yan shook and said, "If that's the case, where Taoist Sky Reaching, Zhang Che, Zhang, Master, Zhang, who is, Yan Hua? It's obvious that there are other Taoists out there. Instead of being attacked by that existence, it's better to find each other and fight together." He guessed that some bigwigs had indeed entered the void after the Great Calamity, and some were trapped in some places. But they could be freed eventually. Moreover, there should be other places of creation in the void that could shelter some of his peers, such as old ancestor Yao Han and the others. He didn't see them again, so he didn't believe that they would just wait for death. They must have found a place to hide. Taoist Xinchang lowered his head and thought for a moment. Then, he said, "If that's the case, we can pay attention to them when we go to the void." Taoist Zhan Yuan pondered for a moment and said, "In the boundless void, we don't know where those Taoists have gone. Moreover, with the disturbance of that existence's magic power, it will be difficult to find them." Taoist Qing Sheng said coldly, "It's still better than not finding them." Quan Dao and Zhang Yan both nodded in agreement. They believed that their relationship with the others was rather distant, and they owed Zhang Yan a favor. Currently, they couldn't speak to Zhang Yan, so as long as Zhang Yan pushed for something, they would choose to follow. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Don't worry, Taoists. I have an item that can help you." He shook his sleeve and took out the artifact he had obtained from the place of creation in Ji Yuan. The artifact was supported by the clouds and slowly moved to the bottom of the stairs. Then, two big hands descended from the sky, each holding a shaft on its left and right, and slowly opened it. In an instant, layers of spiritual light shone from it, and the whole hall became empty. Everyone looked over and saw countless life and death appearing in the world. The changes of the Great Tao were all displayed in front of them, and they could not help but reveal looks of surprise. Taoist Zhan Yuan looked a little excited. He pointed and said, "Fellow Taoist, what you see here is the void." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Yes. This artifact was left behind by Master I. It can be used to find the place of creation in the void. I think that if there are other Taoists in the outside world, they must be hiding in this place." He had once wondered if the patriarch had left this artifact not only to find the place of creation, but also so that his descendants could use it to find him. However, this was only a guess. This artifact was different from the talismans and artifacts passed down by the great underworld patriarch. There was no magic power left on it, so it was a pure artifact. After taking a closer look, everyone understood the effects of this treasure. Even if they were sitting here right now, they would be able to sense everything that happened in the void. This meant that they didn't have to go outside at all, and they just had to hide in their respective places of fortune to be able to sense and deduce what they needed to find. After they confirmed that they didn't have to personally go against that existence, they couldn't help but feel relieved in their hearts. Zhang Yan was the master of Bu Su Tian and the two blessed lands. If he wanted to do something, they could only obey. But who would be willing to take the risk if they wanted to live a safe and secure life? However, they could also see that the effect of this artifact was not as great as they had imagined. At most, it would be of some help in finding the place of creation. But no matter what, with this artifact, they could at least see all the changes in the void. After looking at it, Daoist Shinchang sighed and said, "I didn't expect you to have such an artifact with you. The situation is much clearer now." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "With this artifact, I'm sure you won't doubt me anymore. Now, I'll first refine the artifact with you before going to the void to deal with the follow-up matters." Everyone agreed. Then, with a thought, each of them separated a strand of their magic power and landed it on the battlefield. Zhang Yan flicked his finger, and a fragment of creation flew out. Under his will, it instantly turned into a large jade disc. With a flash of spiritual light, it gathered everyone's magic power and qi. This was a fusion artifact. Because everyone's qi was contained in it, everyone present could use it. Daoist Qing Sheng looked at Zhang Yan and said, "Fellow Daoist, since it's done, why don't you give it a try?" Zhang Yan nodded. Everyone gathered their wills and focused their attention inside. In a split second, each of them had an avatar appear inside. They looked at each other and then disappeared from their original spots. All of them had left the present world and entered the silence. The creation Weili that they used to create their bodies was actually placed in the artifact by Zhang Yan. They didn't have the ability to directly control it, so they could only use it through this artifact. Also, because there was a layer between them, they couldn't directly see the real changes in the creation Weili. Daoist Zhang Yuan felt his consciousness shake, and then he found himself out of Bushutian. The magic power in his body suddenly became stronger, and at the same time, he also sensed the magic power of other people colliding with him. This familiar scene made him exclaim in his heart, "The creation Weili is really mysterious." After sighing for a while, he knew that this was not the time to think about this. He didn't know when that existence would notice this, so he immediately sensed it and looked for the possible existence of the creation essence. However, this kind of boundary was completely integrated, and could be said to be impenetrable by external senses. Unless you really stared at it, it was very easy to ignore it, so it was completely up to luck. He didn't expect too much. Today, the main thing he wanted to do was to find a way to enter the boundary where the creation essence existed and stop it from being devoured by that existence's incarnation. But even in such a place, it was not so easy to find. It was usually like flowing light, appearing and disappearing in an instant, just like the birth and death of the world. Only at the moment when the fluctuations of mana were in harmony with it, would the qi activity be able to seep into it, and before there was a result, even he himself would not know. After the qi activity enters the world, an incarnation will appear. If there is someone with the same qi activity, then according to the rules of the past, there will be a battle between the two of them. In the end, the winner will keep the fragment and hand it over to the original. But in the current situation, that existence would naturally not talk about this. Even if everyone joined forces, they might not be able to fight against that existence. But just because they couldn't do it, it didn't mean that Zhang Yan couldn't do it. Because of the existence of the Dharma Gui, everyone's qi was the same. Whenever that existence's incarnation appeared, he could directly use the Bushutian Weili to clean it up. Unless that existence was in the creation essence, but it was currently entangled by that Almighty, so it couldn't do such a thing, so it could be done without worry. At this time, in the main hall, Daoist Qing Sheng suddenly pointed to a place and said in a deep voice, "Why don't we try here?" Daoist Zhang Yuan was surprised and said, "You found it so quickly?" Everyone also looked over in surprise. Daoist Qing Sheng shook his head and said, "How can it be so easy? I sensed something in that place and wanted to investigate it carefully." Unfortunately, that existence happened to enter the world and entered the Bushutian with everyone. It's just that this place still exists, but it's not a place of fortune, so it's a bit strange. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, since fellow Taoists sensed it, I should go and take a look. He had some guesses in his heart, and he judged that the existence had most likely manifested an incarnation there, so he could go and eliminate it. Actually, it wasn't without its benefits. The more deity refinement cultivators came into contact with each other, the more they could understand each other's secrets. Although cultivators who had comprehended the true past could conceal their secrets, they wouldn't be able to do so completely. At least some of their secrets would be leaked, and the more incarnations of that existence he killed, the more he could pry into the mysteries of the upper realm. Immediately, he focused his mind on that place, and in an instant, an incarnation of magic power stepped inside. Chapter 2050. When Zhang Yan returned to the real world, he went there with his Weili clone. This was because if he wanted to deal with that existence, it was not enough to just rely on his consciousness clone that had infiltrated into the real world. On the other hand, the Weili clone was connected to the main body's consciousness. If something went wrong, he would be able to know what was going on in the real world. When his clone entered the real world, all the spirit refinement cultivators in his sect activated their magic power and kept clashing with the magic power of that existence in the void. Even if that existence's magic power was strong, it was greatly reduced under the deliberate obstruction of so many people. After all, the main body still had to deal with the opponent, so he could not care about these small details for the time being. In the beginning, Shen Chang and the others were wary that that person would come and destroy them. However, even after waiting for a long time, nothing happened. Clearly, that person could tell that their bodies were made from the almighty power of creation, so it would be useless even if they were destroyed. Moreover, it would only distract him for no reason. Thus, he decided to not bother with them. That way, everyone became even more confident. However, in the process of clashing, everyone gradually saw many mysteries that they had never touched before. For a moment, they could not help but be attracted. However, the more they wanted to look, the more they could not see clearly. This was because there was a clear difference in their cultivation levels, and they did not fight directly, so there was a layer between them. Daoist Qing Sheng was the most stubborn about his own path, so he was the first to notice that something was wrong. He reminded everyone, don't bother with looking at this person's human path. It's more important to eliminate his magic power. Don't delay the important matter. Hearing his words, everyone came to their senses, and at the same time, they were shocked. Without a doubt, this situation was deliberately led by that existence, so that they would unknowingly fall into it. There might be other tricks waiting for them, and they might even be implicated by it. If it was just one or two of them acting alone, they might really get lost in it. Fortunately, their qi was connected, so if one of them was wrong, the others would immediately notice it, and they would not fall into the trap. Daoist Shen Chang said with lingering fear, fellow Daoist, you're right to remind us. Everyone, even if we are not the main body, it is not foolproof to fight against that existence. We must not relax because of this. Everyone nodded their heads in agreement and thanked Daoist Qing Sheng. Zhang Yan's clone had already arrived in the main world. However, when he landed, he sensed two vast powers colliding, as if they could crush his clone at any time. He changed his mind slightly and allowed more Weili to pour in to stabilize himself. Only then did he look towards the battle. One of them was that existence, and the other, just as he had guessed, was the Taoist who had helped them last time. However, at this moment, both of them appeared in the form of mana. Whether it was their figures or faces, they were extremely blurry and could not be seen clearly. Due to the endless battle between the two of them, the myriad of worlds here had already collapsed. It was just like the battle between him and Taoist Skysplit. It had long since fallen into a world of chaos, and the magic that surged over from the outside was immediately pushed away. There was no place for it to stay. He didn't join the battle immediately. Instead, he tried to sense it. There was indeed a good fortune fragment here, but the good fortune essence was even purer and more vast than what he'd seen in the past. It was no wonder that the Taoist wanted to personally stop it. If that existence obtained it, then his strength would definitely increase greatly. Since that was the case, he had to kill that clone as soon as possible. Just now, that Taoist's voice sounded in his ears, "Fellow Taoist, you're here. Now, I can leave this place." Zhang Yan was not surprised and said solemnly, "Leave this place to I." With a thought, the creation whaley poured down from the sky and immediately pressed on that existence's clone, causing it to tremble. With this help, the Taoist spun a sword ray and immediately slashed the clone in front of him into pieces. Then, he nodded at him and disappeared, leaving without any hesitation. Zhang Yan understood that the reason why the Taoist was in a hurry to leave was because he was here as a clone of mana. If he could return to his original body, then he would be able to increase his power by a little bit. It was just that he had to use this tiny bit of magic power incarnation, which was enough to show how intense the battle was, but it also proved that what he was doing now was correct. It was fine for him to leave. He was originally prepared to deal with that existence alone, so he did not count on others. Come to think of it, that Taoist trusted him and was not afraid that he would be killed by that existence. Not long after the Taoist left, magic power from the existence outside arrived. In an instant, another avatar was formed. The moment it appeared, a wave of ferocious magic power surged towards Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan continued to use the creation whaley to restrain his body. The Taoist was not here, so he could only bear all the pressure now. This was different from the consciousness incarnation he saw last time, but it was formed from a true strand of magic power. Even though it was very small, it was absolutely not to be underestimated. Fortunately, the mighty force of creation was especially effective against it, so he was still able to firmly defend himself under such a violent impact. As more and more whaley were sent over, he began to try to counterattack. However, this clone was especially stubborn. Even though it shook under the impact of the waves, it did not disperse. Unlike in the land of creation, that person's mana continued to invade from the outside. Even if he destroyed it like just now, he would not be able to solve the root of the problem. Zhang Yan also understood this, so he did this only to restrain that person. As long as he could seize the opportunity to take the fragment of creation, then even if that person's mana continued to come, he would not be able to obtain too much. Speaking of which, that Taoist's mana cultivation was far higher than his, but he was not able to do this only because he did not have the creation whaley with him. He did not know if it was because he did not have the land of creation behind him, or if it was also entrusted to another place. After a long time, under the pressure of the creation whaley, he was forced to be unable to move, and the situation gradually calmed down. Zhang Yan saw that at this moment, he could no longer disturb him, so he immediately took this opportunity to send his consciousness into the depths of this world. Not long after, he sensed the location of the fragment of creation. With another thought, after a while, a ray of light entered his consciousness. At this moment, his heart suddenly felt a cold malice staring at him. When he looked up, he saw a pair of eyes in the silence looking at him. He also looked back. This was not the first time he had faced the other party's gaze. If the other party was willing to come over and fight with him, that would be for the best. Right now, he was only an incarnation. If he could distract the other party's mana, even if it was only for a moment, it would be good. However, that person did not do so. After a while, the gaze retreated. At this moment, the entire world suddenly collapsed. Zhang Yan's consciousness turned and returned to his body. He opened his palm, and there was a fragment of creation there. When the people present saw this, they were all greatly excited. They had some doubts about this action in the beginning, but this result showed that this action had great potential. Even if it failed, it would cause enough trouble for that existence, and they would be able to achieve their goal of restraining it. Taoist Xinchang was slightly surprised. This thing seems to be full of essence. It can already be compared to the ordinary storage place of creation. Zhang Yan could not help but nod. Otherwise, it would not have caused those two to fight over it. Taoist Sun Yuan said, "Oh. I wonder if fellow Taoist can use this to create another land of fortune." As soon as he said this, everyone present became interested. Like a place of creation, the fragment of creation could be used to comprehend the mysteries of the Great Way, but they had never seen such an abundant essence before. It was no wonder that the realm had never disappeared, and instead stayed there permanently. This thing could probably not be called a fragment anymore. They were now living under someone else's roof. If they could find a similar fragment, they might be able to take shelter in it. Zhang Yan seriously thought for a while, then shook his head and said, "There is no need to do this now." This fragment was still far from truly transforming. It wasn't impossible to do so, but it would require more fragments to be injected into it to strengthen it. However, there were many considerations to this method. First of all, the fragments of good fortune were extremely difficult to find. In the past, they did not have many fragments of good fortune in their hands. Among them, there were many fragments of good fortune that had been returned after being refined into celestial treasures. These fragments of good fortune could not be used here because it was like the original clear water being muddied. It was not impossible to restore the water to its original state, but it would require the cultivator to pay a higher price. Obviously, they would not do such a thing now. In this way, there were even fewer fragments of good fortune that could be used. Even if the matter was successful, it would only be one more place of creation, and he did not lack such places. At this time, Daoist Qingxing said, "I also think that there is no need to focus on this. The only right thing to do is to fight that person with all our strength. Now that we have one more fragment of creation here, it means that that person has one less fragment in his hands. We should try our best to find places where there are fragments, and if we can make it impossible for him to obtain them in every place, then just now is the best." Daoist Shinchang said cautiously, "Today's matter went smoothly because that person has no time to care about us, but it may not be so easy in the future. That person may use a countermeasure." Daoist Qingxing said in a deep voice, "We are traveling as the Whaley of creation, so it doesn't matter even if we are scattered by him. As long as we keep our hearts straight and don't go astray, what can he do to us?" Daoist Zhang Yuan stroked his beard and said, "It's better to be more careful." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I hope that this person will cause trouble for us, so that we can divert his attention. As long as that person could not enter the place of creation that was protecting everyone, they would not lose anything. His goal was to obstruct that person, and if he could really attract that person's attention to Busu Tian, then he would be more than happy to do so."